A surprising amount of people have Ouija boards just sitting in their closets somewhere collecting dust, and most people probably have never even used them. I found out what Ouija boards are when I was 16, and when I asked my parents if we had one in our house, my mom told me yes, she did have one buried somewhere in the closet with all the board games. That closet was in the basement by the laundry room, the small closet with a bunch of my parents' old stuff. I was intrigued to try using a Ouija board because I was slightly superstitious. I had my mom help me dig through this closet without disrupting the integrity and neatness of how she sorted everything in there. And lo and behold, eventually she finds this old dusty box that simply said Ouija and had two hands holding the piece that moves around the board called the planchette. The box was kind of falling apart on the edges, even though my mom said they'd only used it a couple times ever. The first thing I did was text a few of my friends to come use the Ouija board with me that weekend when I'd be home alone, to make it scarier. My friend Liam, who was 17, had a car, so he picked up my friend Jack and they came right over. It was like 9 p.m. It was dark out, obviously, and my parents were gone for a couple nights. My younger brother of 2 years, Adam, was also home, so I asked him to join as well. We were going to play on the floor in the loft, which was converted into my bedroom. We turned off the lights and then turned on a flashlight and put it on the floor in the corner of the room, pointed towards the board. All four of us sat on one side of the board and we held the planchette and started asking questions. None of us had ever done this before, so we asked basic questions. I said, if there's someone there, move the planchette. Then for the first time, it started to move to the word yes. Adam asked, how old are you? And the planchette moved from the number 6 to 7, 67. We looked at each other, and while I suspected one of them were moving it, and I'm sure the others did too, we all played along and didn't break immersion. We took turns asking questions. Eventually, I asked the board, are you a demon? And the planchette went to the word yes. At this point, we all laughed and broke immersion, knowing one of us was messing around. At that moment, the flashlight turned off, and all of us stopped laughing and got really scared. Who did that? Someone asked. But it was clearly none of us. The flashlight was all the way in the corner. I crawled to get it and kept pressing the button. It wouldn't turn back on. I turned on my bedside lamp, and I saw the freaked out expressions on my friend's and brother's face. I said that was the most terrifying moment for the battery to die, but also part of me believed it wasn't a coincidence. We stopped playing after that moment, and we even left my room and went to the backyard just because we were all freaked out being in the house at that moment. I had to sleep in that room that night though, and when my friends left and Adam eventually went to sleep, I knew I had to as well. I put the Ouija board back in the box and brought it downstairs out of my room. I just felt weird sleeping in the same room as it that night. As soon as I turned off the light, I just tried to go to sleep right away, not sitting on my phone for an hour or whatever, like I usually do. As I was starting to finally drift off into a half-sleep state, something in my closet fell over. I immediately rose up and looked in the direction of the closet door. I flicked on the bedside lamp and walked over to the closet. It was a small walk-in closet where I kept some of my clothes. There's a light switch on the outside of the closet that turned on a single light bulb inside of it. I flicked it on and looked down at the crack at the bottom of the door. There were what looked to be two shadows cast by feet on the other side of the door. As soon as I saw this, I started screaming at him and ran to his room. I explained to him what I just saw and led him to my room to show him. When he came to my room, the light in the closet was still on, but the shadows at the bottom of the door weren't there anymore. I opened the door, and there was nobody in the closet, but there was something on the floor. It was a wooden box that I made in arts and crafts that I would put childhood memorabilia in. It somehow fell over and the contents spilled onto the floor. There is no draft in the world that would have knocked that over. It made no logical sense. I slept in my parents' bed that night and then the next, and for a week after that I slept in the spare bedroom. Eventually I would start sleeping in my own bed again, but I would never forget that night. I haven't touched a Ouija board since. I had never used a Ouija board until I was in my mid-20s. It was never something that interested me, but my friend George was very briefly talking to this girl who was into that sort of thing. Her name was Mandy. She was into exploring abandoned and allegedly haunted places. One day he invited me to go with them and her friend to this apparently haunted abandoned house about a half-hour drive away. He guaranteed me the friend was cute in order to entice me to go. I didn't have anything going on that night, so I said, why not? We would be doing this late at night. George picked me up first around 11 p.m., and then we drove to pick up the girls from this park. I had already met Mandy once, but not her friend. Her friend Carly had red hair, a nose ring, and sleeve on her right arm. Mandy had already been to this house before, and she said it was high in activity, a term I'd never heard till that point, but obviously could put together what she meant. I smiled a bit as she said it because I honestly laughed to myself. I don't believe in the paranormal myself, so I found it a little humorous. Mandy brought this big bag with her, so during the drive I asked what's inside. And then she goes and pulls out this box, a Ouija board box, and then she pulls out a candle. Then George said, "Oh, that's the surprise." Apparently her surprise to George was that we would be using a Ouija board in this abandoned house. I'm gonna be honest, that didn't sound super fun to me, but I was there for the adventure. Mandy directed George where to park when we got close. It was this really dark street with no streetlights, with an open field on one side and trees on the other. The house driveway was gated off, so we had to walk from there. We walked through some woods that led us to the backyard of the house. From there, Mandy led us to the back window that she climbed through last time. It was a bit high up, so we had to help the girls up. Then we just climbed in ourselves, and we walked around the house for a bit. All the furniture was still inside, but it was just decrepit. It hadn't been lived in for probably decades. I don't scare easily, and I must admit, being in there at night was very eerie. It would probably be terrifying alone. It was dead silent besides our footsteps on the creaky floors. There were some old portraits of people hung on the wall. They looked like they were taken in the 50s, which made me wonder how old this house was and what was the story behind it. Most likely the couple living there died and there was no family left to claim the house. Mandy set up the board on the floor and she lit these 2 candles. I could tell she was really into this stuff. She took lead with this, asking a bunch of spiritual questions. The planchette piece didn't move for the first few questions as she kept asking, is anyone there, can anyone hear, etc. Eventually, it started to spell out the word hello. I laughed and looked at George, who laughed back, but the girls were serious and even said stop laughing. Out of respect, I did stop smiling and put a serious face on. Mandy asked, what's your name? And the planchette moved around the board slowly to spell out the name Gregory. She then asked, how long have you been dead? And then it moved around to spell out 30 years. I didn't believe any of this for a second. I knew Mandy or Carly were doing this. This went on for some time, and we played along, until there was a huge thump from upstairs in the house. We all jumped and let go of the planchette. George said, is someone up there? And Mandy insisted it could be Gregory. Mandy and Carly put their hands back on the planchette and asked, Gregory, did you make that sound? And George and I stopped her and said we need to leave if someone's upstairs. Then we watched as the planchette moved to the word yes. At this point, George and I were convinced the girls were pranking us, and that they had someone upstairs trying to scare us. Then we heard footsteps above us. There was no denying these sounds were footsteps. George and I agreed to go upstairs and check it out, expecting to find someone trying to prank us. The girls kept saying, no, come back down. We went up the extremely creaky steps and entered the first open door we found. It was a bedroom. The furniture and everything in the room was extremely decayed, and then there was this door, right in the corner of the room, most likely a closet. It was cracked open, and we whispered to each other that we thought we heard something in the closet. I put my finger up to my lips to tell him to be quiet, and we listened. When we heard a clear exhale behind the door, we both quickly left the room. We hurried downstairs, expecting to find the girls still in the living room, but they were gone. The candles, the Ouija board, everything. There was just darkness in the house now. We didn't even hear them sneak out. We left through the window again in a hurry and ran to the car. George tried calling Mandy's phone multiple times, but it went straight to voicemail every time. She blocked him. They were nowhere to be found either. We went straight to the car and drove home. George never heard from that girl again. He only hung out with her 2 times. He didn't know where she lived or anything. We did form our own crazy theory that they were in fact trying to trap us somehow, and the footsteps upstairs were from somebody they knew. It's also possible they never left the house, and that they were hiding somewhere inside. The more superstitious out there may believe that we did in fact speak to a spirit though, and something more supernatural was going on. In October of 2015, when I was a junior in high school, I was in my horror phase where I was obsessed with everything scary and supernatural. With Halloween coming up, I was also reading a lot of scary stories about Ouija boards and people's experiences with them. My curiosity was piqued, and so I ordered a Ouija board off Amazon, and when it arrived, I waited till a night our parents were not home to use it. I convinced my little sister to try it with me. We were at the dining room table with the lights dimmed, both of us holding the planchette. I asked the board some questions, and my sister and I both laughed because it was kind of awkward and funny. I started to move the piece around, trying to creep out my sister, but she knew it was me doing it. After a few minutes of doing this, we were starting to get bored, and my sister wanted to stop. I said let's try for a few more minutes. After a little bit more waiting for the planchette to move from some unseen entity, we decided to give up. My sister went to her room after this, and I went to mine. I looked up more Ouija board stories online and kept reading people's experiences with them, and then I looked up why it didn't work for us. Other people had said their first time using Ouija boards nothing had happened, so I decided I would try again. That night around 1 a.m., when my sister was already asleep, I went back down to the dining room and dimmed the lights again. I once again tried to use the Ouija board, asking similar questions as a few hours ago, just in a lower voice to not wake up my sister. I held the planchette with both hands, waiting for it to move, but it never did. Instead, I heard sounds from upstairs, like soft footsteps. It could have been my sister. She might have heard me down here. The footstep-type sounds were followed by a muffled female voice. It didn't sound quite like my sister, though, and the voice was coming from directly above me. The room above the dining room was our older brother's room, who was away at college. My sister wouldn't have been in there. I went up the stairs quietly, and I heard the voice getting louder as I got closer to my brother's room. It was coming from in there. I was curious if my sister was playing a prank on me, changing her voice to sound lower to scare me. I got to the door and put my ear up against it. I heard the voice of what sounded like an older woman. I wasn't sure how my sister could be doing a voice like that. At first I didn't know what was being said, until I realized that the voice kept saying, "Grandma's here, Georgie," over and over. It was the voice of my dead grandma. I felt every hair in my body stand up. I opened the door and turned on the light, and no one was inside. The voice had stopped. I ran to my room and shut the door and locked it and curled up under the covers. I felt the whole room spinning as I couldn't form any rational thoughts of what just happened. It was too vivid to have imagined it. When I calmed down, I did a prayer before going to sleep. Or at least trying to go to sleep. I was awake all night. I still remember this night just as vividly 8 years later. My son George has always had the strangest friends. I'm not sure why, but in his earlier years, he always attracted what would be considered the weird kids. I've got a ton of stories about this, but there's one that kind of sticks out like a thorn. He was in the 4th grade, and we had just moved due to my husband's reassignment, so George was new to his school. He had always been an outgoing and friendly kid, so my husband and I weren't particularly worried about his ability to make new friends. We were transitioning well as a family, and everything was going well with him at school. I was beyond pleased the first time I met all of George's classmates' parents, as they all seemed like upstanding, honest people. A few months after the move, I got a call from George's school in the middle of the day requesting one of his parents come in to discuss an incident involving him and another student. My husband was at work, so I assumed the responsibility and agreed to meet with the principal after picking up my son. I remember feeling a mixture of anger and confusion. Anger, obviously. I mean, my son had probably been in a fight. which I'd need to punish him for should I find out he was the antagonizer. But confusion as well. Physical altercations were very uncharacteristic of George, which made this more concerning to me. As I was walking him to the principal's office, he refused to answer any of my questions about the situation, which was also very unlike him. Usually, he was extremely talkative and what you'd call an oversharer, so his silence was somewhat unsettling. I figured he was either embarrassed or scared, so I didn't think much of it. The principal asked that George sit in the waiting room outside his office, so that's where I left him. After closing the door, the principal directed me to a chair in front of his desk, which is where I sat down. He began asking me questions about George, the kinds of questions you'd expect. How is his behavior at home? Does he listen? Does he talk back? Is he respectful? You know, things like that. I had nothing but positive things to say. George was an extremely well-behaved and respectful boy, and that's not the mother in me. I was just telling the objective truth. Eventually, the principal told me why I had been called in. Apparently, George had gotten into a brief altercation with a classmate after recess, a boy named Sebastian. I asked about the circumstances of the fight, and this is what I was told. They had been the last two students outside, and they were walking up the stairs together. Seemingly out of nowhere, George pulled an eraser out of his pocket and struck Sebastian over the head with it, causing him to fall to the ground and start screaming. I was baffled. It was totally unlike George to do something like that without being provoked. Plus, I had heard about the Sebastian boy before. George spoke fondly of him, like they were close friends. I asked the principal more questions, but he didn't seem to have the answers, and ultimately admitted that no one had seen the incident, but both boys had independently confirmed details of the story. He then said that George wasn't in trouble, as a little fight wasn't too uncommon. He told me that he just wanted to inform me, and that no further action would be taken, which definitely calmed me down. After that, he excused me, so I left. George was still silent about the whole thing as I drove him home, and only opened up to me right before bedtime. Admittedly, I had grown frustrated with him for not talking to me, which was probably why he quit the silent act. He told me that Sebastian had tricked him. I asked him to elaborate, and he told me that they had been playing make-believe Street Fighter. As per Sebastian's instruction, George had pulled out an eraser for a KO move of some sort. Out of nowhere, Sebastian fell to the ground and pretended to be really hurt. He then whispered in George's ear that he'd seriously hurt him if George didn't pretend like he'd attacked him. So that's what George did, and all the teachers assumed it had been a real fight. Rightfully so, I was pretty pissed. My little boy had been taken advantage of and falsely accused. Instead of going to the school, I decided to handle things myself. That night, I went through the school's directory and found Sebastian's mother's phone number. She introduced herself as Maggie. I was kind of taken aback by how sweet and genuine she sounded on the phone. She told me she had heard about the incident, gotten the real story from Sebastian, and already reprimanded him. I thought it was kind of odd that Sebastian would have told the truth to his mother so soon, but I was happy I didn't have to do any convincing. She then went on to say that Sebastian had always had some minor behavioral problems growing up, and he'd sometimes think and act like another person entirely. I actually started to feel bad the more she told me. It seemed as if he wasn't fully in control of some of his actions. Maggie suggested that the boys schedule a sleepover to make up for the whole thing and become better friends, which I thought was a great idea. She offered to host, and I was appreciative of that. That weekend, I drove over to her house with George, who had returned to his bubbly, talkative self. Maggie invited me in, and the two of us got to know each other over some wine while the boys played in the basement. Like I said before, Maggie seems like a completely upstanding person, and I really enjoyed her company. I ended up staying for a few hours, and the time flew by. Eventually, I just had to ask about Sebastian's behavior, as it had been bugging me for a while. Her entire demeanor changed, and she lowered her voice a bit. She told me that he often had trouble making friends, and that he's seen a few doctors, all of whom think it's something he'll outgrow soon. She went on to say that he's gotten much better at controlling himself, and the fact that he was being more social at school was a good sign. I didn't inquire much more than that. I just wanted to make sure my son would be safe for the night. Maggie promised me George would be in good hands, and that Sebastian didn't have a history of getting physical or violent. more so just acting strange. That was enough reassurance for me. This woman was clearly genuine, and it actually felt kind of nice knowing that George would be helping Sebastian learn how to make friends. Eventually, it came time to leave, so I went downstairs to say goodbye to George. The two boys were laughing and playing Battleship. It looked like they were really getting along. I kissed my son goodbye and drove home. The next morning, I went to go pick him up. When I got to the house, he was waiting near the door with all his stuff and a smile on his face. I assumed the night went well. I said good morning to Maggie and packed George's stuff in the car. As we were driving away though, he started bawling out of nowhere. I asked him what was wrong in a concerned voice, and what he told me was quite literally jaw-dropping. George said that everything was going well until it came time to go to sleep. The boys had set up their sleeping arrangements in the basement, 2 air mattresses side by side. Everything seemed normal when they went to bed. But at some point in the night, George woke up. He wasn't sure why at first. Then he heard something. Whispering. It was coming from the bathroom. The door was slightly open, and there was a strange flickering light inside, not like a regular bathroom light. As George described it, it seemed more like a candle light. He listened closer and realized it was Sebastian talking. But he wasn't just talking. He was having a full conversation. George thought maybe he was on the phone or something, but the more he listened, the weirder it got. Sebastian wasn't calling himself Sebastian. He was calling himself Mr. Jim. George felt frozen. It was like Sebastian thought he was someone else, and he wasn't talking to anyone, just the mirror. Then the candle went out. Everything was dark again. George squeezed his eyes shut, pretending to be asleep. A long time passed, and then he heard the bathroom door creak open. His stomach dropped when he heard whispering again, this time right above him. It went on for a while. George didn't understand the words. It didn't even sound like English. He just lay there, too scared to move. Eventually, Sebastian went back to bed like nothing happened. In the morning, he was totally normal again. George didn't dare ask him about it. When George told me what happened, I was horrified. My gut told me this wasn't just a case of childhood imagination. Something was wrong. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to tell someone. I called Maggie first. At first, she laughed it off, saying Sebastian has always been a creative kid, but as I pressed her, her voice faltered. Eventually, she admitted that his so-called behavioral problems were more serious than she let on. One psychiatrist had even suggested he was showing signs of multiple personality disorder. They had already moved twice before, she told me in a hushed tone, because Sebastian had been kicked out of school. I was stunned, furious even. Why the hell hadn't she told me this before? Why would she put my son in danger like that? Then she did something unexpected. She begged me not to notify the school. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to respect her wishes, but another part of me knew that something was very wrong. I blurted out, "Okay," and hung up the phone before she could respond. I told myself I'd make my decision by the end of the week, but I never got the chance. That Monday, Sebastian full-on attacked another student at recess. It was serious enough that the school sent out a statement to all the parents, though they kept the details vague. By the end of the day, I found out that he had been expelled. I tried calling Maggie, but her phone had seemingly been disconnected. The situation was incredibly unsettling. Just days ago we had spoken, and now, suddenly, she was unreachable. I didn't even know what I wanted to say to her, just that I wanted to say something. There were no other numbers or emails in the school directory, just that one number that was now disconnected. A few days later, the curiosity got too overwhelming, so I bit the bullet and drove to her house. When I arrived, it was completely vacated. No moving trucks, no sign of a rushed departure, just gone. It didn't make sense. How could they have left so quickly? I tried looking them up, searching for any trace of them online. I found nothing. No forwarding address, no mention of them anywhere. It was like they had never existed at all. That was a long time ago, and George wasn't too badly affected by it. In all honesty, I think he's mostly forgotten about it. I haven't though. I often think about what could have happened to my son that night in that basement, or what kind of things that kid Sebastian has been doing since. My upbringing was a little unorthodox. I grew up in a Southern Baptist household, the kind where we didn't believe in ghosts, but were absolutely certain about demons. Let me explain. If something strange happened, it wasn't a spirit or wandering soul. It was something darker, something biblical. I never fully bought into it, but the message was drilled into me from a young age. Rejecting demons meant rejecting scripture itself. My mother, though, was different. Faith was optional for her. She wasn't atheist or agnostic, just indifferent. She'd say things like, "God and I have an understanding," whenever I pressed her about church. While I leaned into religion as a source of structure and stability, she drifted further from it. It was one of the many things that widened the gap between us. I won't sugarcoat it. My mother struggled with addiction, mental health issues, things she never wanted help for. Some days she was functional, others she was downright insane. I tried not to take it personally, but it was hard. Looking back, she definitely had schizophrenia or some kind of adjacent condition. But before you say anything about my family being neglectful of her mental health, it was a different time back then. One afternoon, I had a nightmare so vivid that I still remember every detail to this day. In the dream, I was lying in bed when my mother stormed into my room, screaming in a fit of rage. She grabbed me by the wrist and started shaking me violently. I woke up in a pool of sweat, my body still rigid with fear. But before I could shake off the dream, it happened again. Except this time, I wasn't asleep. The door barged open, and there she was, just as she had been in my nightmare. Same expression, same unhinged anger, same words. It was like the dream had been some kind of prophecy. I barely managed to push her off and yell for her to stop, and then it was over. She left as suddenly as she had entered, and when I confronted her the next morning, she had no memory of it. She seemed confused, even a little hurt that I was so shaken. I told myself it was a coincidence, some bizarre overlap between my subconscious and her moods, but part of me wondered if it was something worse. A few weeks later, I heard her screaming from the backyard. It was a strange sound, not a panicked scream or even a distressed one. The scream sounded more excited. I don't even know if that makes sense, but that's the best way I can describe it. I rushed outside and froze at what I saw. My mother was standing in the yard, grinning, holding a massive 7-foot-long snake in her bare hands. That was terrifying enough on its own, but there's something you don't know which made it even worse. My mother had a lifelong phobia of snakes. She couldn't even look at them on TV without recoiling. But there she was, gripping one like it was a toy. She said, "Come here," and motioned for me to grab the snake. I took a step back, shaking my head. I literally said, "Mom, what the hell?" But the look in her eye told me she couldn't even understand the words I was saying. She just smiled wider and tilted her head like she was trying to scare me. I couldn't deal with it. I turned and ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding. I peeked out the window and saw her still standing there, holding the snake like an offering. Eventually, she let it slither onto the ground and walked back inside as if nothing had happened. Later, when I asked her about it, she shrugged like I was making it up. She told me I must have had a strange dream and refused to entertain me when I continued to ask about it. That was nothing compared to what I'm about to tell you, though. That winter, my church held an overnight lock-in. I was relieved to go. Church was my escape, a place where I could be around predictable, normal people. My mother dropped me off completely sober and even kissed my forehead before driving away. At around 4:30 a.m., just as we were settling into sleep, a loud knocking echoed through the chapel. We all sat up, glancing at each other. The knocking moved, traveling around the building in an impossible way at times. It sounded like it was coming from multiple directions at once. It wasn't wind, it wasn't an animal. It was rhythmic, circling the chapel like someone or something was trying to break in. The pastor, the only one with a key, was asleep in his office and hadn't heard a thing. I ran to wake him, and as soon as he stepped into the chapel, the knocking stopped. He opened the front doors and literally stumbled back in fear. Standing there, barefoot and sweating in the freezing air, was my mother. Her clothes were disheveled, and her hair was dripping with sweat. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. She didn't acknowledge the pastor. Her eyes locked on me immediately. A slow, unsettling smile stretched across her face as she walked toward me. I wanted to run. The pastor tried to hold me back, whispering, "Stay here." But I felt completely powerless, like I had no choice but to go with her. I climbed into the car, afraid that she was going to do something, but she didn't. The drive home was silent. She didn't speak, didn't explain. She didn't answer when I asked why she was there. When we got home, she stopped in the doorway and just stared at me. She stood there silently watching me as I walked to my room. I closed the door, locked it, and lay awake for hours listening. In the morning, she was in the kitchen cooking breakfast. She was cheerful and clearly oblivious to what had happened the night before. She jumped back when she saw me, saying she was just about to pick me up from the church. I felt the blood drain from my face. She had no memory of knocking on the church doors, no memory of driving me home. It was freaky. I expected someone, the pastor, a church elder, even one of the chaperones, to say something about what had happened, but no one did. It was like they didn't know what to make of it, or worse, they didn't want to. That's kind of the way people treated my mom back then. That was decades ago. She's gone now, but her memory is something that will never leave me, for better or for worse. I don't know if I believe in demons or the supernatural anymore, but I can't explain what happened. The logical explanation is that she was suffering from mental illness, maybe addiction withdrawal, or maybe something else entirely. But the memory lapses, the eerie timing, the way she acted like a different person some nights, it still haunts me. I tell myself there's a rational answer for all of it, but even now, I'm not sure I believe that. My eldest son started sleepwalking when he was about 8 or 9. I had heard of kids going through phases like that, so I wasn't too concerned at first. It was just one of those things. A little unsettling, sure, but nothing I thought much about. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so none of my kids have ever been able to sneak around the house at night without me knowing. That's actually how I first figured out about my son's habit. Most nights, I'd wake up and find him standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, rocking slightly on his heels, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His eyes would be open, but they weren't seeing anything. That was the one part that always got me. For any of you who have lived with a sleepwalker, you know exactly what I'm talking about. His gaze would pass right through me, empty and distant, like he was looking past me into something I couldn't see. It was always extremely strange, and I never fully acclimated to finding him like that. Sometimes he'd mumble something under his breath, words too soft and slurred to understand. Other times, he wouldn't make a sound, just standing there, breathing in that slow, steady way that somehow made it even worse. I'd gently guide him to bed, whispering his name, telling him everything was fine. He never seemed to remember any of it in the morning. Things escalated a few months after I made the realization that he was a sleepwalker. One night, I woke up to a rhythmic tapping sound. It sounded like water droplets repeatedly dripping onto a window pane, only it wasn't raining outside. It was soft, barely loud enough to wake me. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, some far-off noise that my half-asleep brain had misinterpreted. But as I lay there, the sound continued, steady and deliberate. It wasn't sporadic like rainfall would be. It occurred at regular intervals, and always at the same volume. I kept listening, trying to figure out what it could be. It wasn't the house settling, and it wasn't the wind outside. It was too precise. Once I realized the tapping wasn't going to stop, I begrudgingly accepted that I'd have to deal with it. I sat up and looked towards the door, which is where the sound was coming from. My husband was fast asleep, and I didn't want to disturb him. I should mention that I wasn't scared, just curious. Otherwise, I probably would have woken him up. Anyway, I got out of bed to investigate. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw him. My son facing the wall, his forehead lightly knocking against it in slow, measured taps. His fingertips gently grazed the wall in rhythm with his forehead taps, as if he was trying to walk through it. I remember calling his name, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't react, just kept pressing his head forward, knocking it in that eerie rhythmic way, like he was testing something, like he was trying to push through. I stepped closer, but right before I was about to intervene, I hesitated. Something about the way he was moving genuinely sent a chill right through me. I gently reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, shaking him just enough to pull him out of whatever trance he was in. He blinked, took a step back, and then, as if nothing had happened, let me lead him back to bed. He never mentioned it in the morning. It happened a few more times, but it was pretty infrequent if I'm being honest. I figured it was just another strange habit of sleepwalkers. Maybe some kind of subconscious response to the wall being there. Some internal sense of space that his dreaming mind hadn't accounted for. And eventually, he outgrew it. The sleepwalking stopped, and the strange, vacant staring in the hallway became a weird little memory that I mostly forgot about. That is, until my younger son started doing the same thing years later. The sleepwalking, I mean. At first, I brushed it off. Kids go through phases. Some behaviors repeat themselves. It was just so uncanny that both of them started sleepwalking around the same age. Again though, nothing too unusual. Genetics are a fascinating thing. But eventually, I started noticing the little details. The things that gave me a growing sense of concern. It wasn't just that he sleepwalked. It was how he sleepwalked. He stood in the hallway, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes open but unfocused. He moved the same way as my older son had, with that slow, eerie rhythm, like his movements weren't completely random. It was unsettling. It felt like I was living the memory of watching my older son do the same thing years earlier. But it got worse than that. One night, I woke up to that tapping noise again. I already knew what I'd see before I stepped into the hallway, and I was right. There he was, forehead pressed to the exact same spot, knocking against the wall like he was trying to step into something that wasn't there. It was the exact same behavior my older son had exhibited all those years ago, from the forehead taps all the way down to the way his fingers brushed against the wall. I called his name. Nothing. I touched his shoulder. Nothing. He just kept knocking, his small body swaying slightly, lost in some deep, unreachable place. And that's when it hit me. He had never seen his older brother sleepwalk. At least not that I know of. His brother hadn't done this in years. There was no reason for him to exhibit the same exact behavior. Not just the wandering, but the standing, the tapping, the eerie, misplaced urgency of it. I don't know why, but that thought made me feel sick. After some badgering, I eventually snapped him out of his trance. I guided him back to bed and tucked him in like I had done so many times before, trying to tell myself that it was just one of those things. And then, just like his brother, he outgrew it. Just like that, no more sleepwalking, no more tapping. He had no recollection of it either. For years, I didn't think about it. In all honesty, I had forgotten about the whole thing, but there's a reason I'm writing this now. My sons are away at college now, and the house is a lot quieter than what I'm used to. Because of that, my husband and I have to find new things to occupy some of that downtime with. A few weeks ago, we decided to renovate the house. The house is pretty old, and we've lived in it long enough that we've decided to change things up. New floors, new paint, some fresh updates to make the place feel new again. It was all minor work, nothing too intensive. We were stripping the old wallpaper when we noticed something underneath. At first, I thought it was just some old backing or maybe a weird stain, but as we peeled more away, my breath caught. It was an old, antique-style mirror, a mirror that had been covered for some reason. My first thought was, why the hell would someone cover a mirror instead of removing it? I felt ridiculous, standing there staring at a piece of glass like it was going to do something, but I couldn't help but feel like we weren't supposed to find it, like it had been sealed away for a reason. And that's when I realized the mirror was positioned in the exact spot on the wall that my sons had been bumping into all those years ago. The memories came flooding back, and I stood there in shock. There was no logical reason they should have known it was there. They couldn't have, and yet somehow they had. Both of them had independently been trying to walk into something that was impossible to see through the wallpaper. Forget about the fact that they were unconscious. I immediately got rid of that mirror, but I'm still pretty freaked out by the whole thing. There's got to be some kind of rational explanation for this, but I can't think of one. I still don't know what to make of this. I really don't. I work at a CVS open 24 hours a day. I've been working at this location for 3 years now, and I'm one of the higher-ups. I agreed to take on the overnight shifts because I believe it helps my chances of getting another promotion, and I like to be on my boss's good side. There would only be one employee working the 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift, as that's all that's really needed. Once the pharmacy opens at 9 a.m., that's when business usually picks up. The 2 employees before me left after I was set up. At my hours, so few customers come in that my job varies from cash register to simply stock working. The beeper at the front door that would go off would alert me when a customer would enter, so I'd know when to go back to the register and wait. A few hours into my shift, I went back to the register to check my phone, which I had charging, and I had a new voicemail from an unknown number. I pulled it up and listened. It was some weird voice on the other end that I couldn't tell belonged to a male or female, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. Like, the sound quality was terrible. The transcription was unavailable for that reason. Obviously, I just ignored it because everyone gets weird calls once in a while. As I continued doing stock work, my phone started to go off. I pulled out my phone and saw a bunch of texts from that number that just called. The first text said, "Call back when you can." The second one said, "I know you're at work, I'm coming to visit." The third one said, "What time are you working till?" I had no idea who this could be. I texted back, "Who the hell is this?" The typing bubble popped up for like 20 seconds, then it went away. They didn't respond to that. Okay, a little unnerving, yes, but I still had to go about my work. Eventually I heard the ding by the front door, alerting me someone entered, so I went back to the register and waited. I didn't see anyone walking around though, and I waited there for quite a while actually. Eventually I just decided, okay, that's enough waiting, and went back to stocking shelves. I'd say it was around 2 a.m., a couple hours into my shift. I got a new cart full of items from the back section, this time beauty products, the second aisle in the store. I brought the cart over there and noticed a woman in the corner of the next aisle over, the first aisle. I stepped into that aisle and looked down, asking if she needed any help. She was looking down at one of the products in the corner. She didn't acknowledge me. Didn't know if she heard me or not, but I just felt awkward, so I left her alone. I walked back to the register just to wait there for her to finish up, and then I started getting more texts from that number. I was basically getting spammed with random messages that made no sense, except one that said, "I'm here." So I said screw it and I called the number. I heard a ringing sound coming from inside the store, and my heart started beating twice as fast. I felt a heavy feeling in my throat. I canceled the call, and the ringing stopped. I brought myself to walk over to that last aisle again, where the ringing was coming from. That woman was still there in that corner. I yelled, "Joke's over, I'm calling the cops, whoever you are." I almost knew it had to be some girl I knew playing a prank on me. I went back around the counter because for some reason I felt safer there. I really didn't want to call the police though. Instead, I called my best friend, who picked up on the first try. I asked him to think of anyone we knew with brunette hair who had my number and would be playing a prank on me like this. He guessed a few names, but based on the body shape of that woman, it was none of them. My friend told me to just stop being a pussy since it was a girl. I told him, alright, whatever, and hung up the phone. I was about to suck it up and walk over there, when I noticed her, peering half of her head from around the corner of the beauty aisle. She had to be kneeling down too because the shelf in that aisle is lower than the rest. The first thing I noticed was blood trickling down her cheeks. She was smiling and I heard her making these fucked up laughing sounds. It looked like she cut the skin on her cheeks right next to her lips, and this was when I realized she wasn't our age. She looked like she was anywhere from 30 to 40. I took one step closer and I recognized her. It was this lady with serious mental issues who had DM'd me with a fake account before, and as far as I knew, she was dangerous and was supposed to be in some psychiatric center. She must have gotten my number through my Instagram, which I have set as a public figure profile, which includes my phone number. Seeing half her bloodied face peering at me, smiling, made me want to yak. I yelled at her to get away or I'd stab her. Of course, a complete bluff. I ran to one of the back aisles and hid from her, and I only sighed a breath of relief when I heard the beep of the front door go off. I went to go check if she was still there, but she wasn't. And so I called 911 and had the police take a report, showed them the CCTV footage, and warned them of her name and that she had serious mental issues. The officers were very nice and told me they'd be in the immediate area in case she returned. I blocked the number she was texting me from, and I like to think the police contacted her family. I used to work the dairy aisle in a grocery store. It was the worst job I ever had. A lot of heavy lifting, expired dairy products, and shivering. The big dairy cooler was in the back of the store in the area where all the groceries yet to be stocked on the shelves were kept. I would often just chill in the dairy cooler, no pun intended, because the supervisors on duty would never think to check on me in there. I'd bring a hoodie just so I wouldn't get cold. Anyway, one night I was working till 10 p.m. The store got quiet past 9. However, Mr. Senko, the supervisor who was a pain in the ass, was on duty. So after stocking the milk cartons one more time for the night, I brought everything to the back area again. On my way back to the dairy cooler to just hide and chill in there, I saw very briefly, for like half a second, the face of someone through the glass of the cooler door. But they either just ducked down or faded away out of my view. Who was in there? I went through the doors to see, and got hit with that blast of cold air and the loud sound of the giant refrigerator blowing cold air into the room. Boxes, pallets, and crates of milk everywhere, but no immediate sight of anyone. There were many places to hide behind the giant piles of boxes, but no one was in there. So I did my usual. I sat on an empty milk crate hidden behind a big pile of boxes. Then suddenly the lights in the cooler turned off, and it went almost pitch dark, besides the light from outside the cooler coming in through the glass of the door. I had a mini freakout because I thought Mr. Senko knew I was in here and was basically signaling for me to come out. I stood up and came out from around the boxes, and then I froze. Something was blocking partial view of the two cooler doors. There was a silhouette of a really tall person right in front of me. It couldn't be Mr. Senko, he was kind of short, and the figure right in front of me had to be a foot taller than me. Suddenly, the light flickered back on, and the figure I thought I saw right in front of me was no longer there. I nervously walked around where I thought I saw something standing. I even waved my hand through the air in that spot. I somehow felt like I wasn't alone in there, and so I burst through the doors and shut the dairy cooler light. I peeked inside now with the light off, but that figure I saw in there just a moment ago was still gone. I threw my apron off and clocked out early. I didn't care if Mr. Senko would be mad. I just needed to get out of there. That was the one paranormal thing to ever happen in my life. I do overnight stock shifts for various local Lowe's home improvement stores. All I do is work whichever specific location needs me for the night, usually dependent on which location is having the most business. My job is to unload trucks, operate forklifts in the back section and throughout the store, and do night stock work. The trucker on duty that night was Paul, the only other guy with me that night. Once we successfully unloaded the truck, he helped me sort them in the back room before going off to do another pickup with the truck. So I was left alone to continue work as normal, nothing I wasn't used to. I'd scan the new shipments to take inventory, then I'd bring the items out to the floor and stock shelves with the new items. That's exactly what I was doing, going back and forth from the back warehouse section to the main floor, stocking shelves, sometimes using the forklift.
I was scanning items with the inventory gun towards the back section of the warehouse when a loud crash scared the living shit out of me, to the point that I jumped and turned around mid-air. It was a big box that had fallen off a large pile of pallets full of unopened packages. The box's contents didn't spill out, the box was still intact, so I went to get the forklift to lift the packages back up onto the pallet. It was at this point I smelt a funky odor, but it wasn't the most uncommon thing ever in the warehouse, so I continued my work. At some point later that night, I turned the corner into the paint aisle and saw someone walking all the way down at the other side. They were dressed in dark clothes. No one else was supposed to be in the store, and they weren't wearing work clothes. So I shouted, "Hey." They turned around, and when they saw me, they took off running down an intersecting aisle. Naturally, I yelled again and started chasing after him. Of course, when I got to the intersecting aisle, he was nowhere to be seen. He could have been in any aisle by then. Still, I did one quick jog down the middle aisle to look through all the intersecting aisles, but I didn't see anyone. I called anyone who I thought could have possibly been on duty, but nobody even picked up. I was at a loss for who that could be. I had to assume it was an intruder. I returned to the warehouse, and as I walked through the doors, I heard another crash from the back section of the warehouse. I ran in that direction and discovered something had fallen from the same pile of pallets and boxes. That was it. I had to run and grab a ladder to go climb up the stack of boxes. When I got to the top, I realized there was a perimeter, or wall rather, of packages and boxes surrounding one big hole. In this hole, there was a homeless-looking man dressed in all black, the same man I had just seen. This was where the odor from earlier was coming from. He looked at me, and I looked back at him, speechless. I didn't know what to say. He got up and seemed as though he were coming to lunge at me. I quickly stepped down the ladder low enough to where I could jump off. Then I ran down the aisle of the warehouse and stopped. I got on the phone with the police, and a couple officers showed up 15 minutes later. Of course, the little secret home that man had made between boxes was empty now. He evacuated with all of his stuff. Camera footage later revealed that man had been staying in that little secret spot he created for a whole week. No one really checks the camera footage unless there's a reason to. That's how he got away with it unnoticed for so long. I'm 28 years old now, but I vividly remember a horrifying incident that occurred when I was a 22-year-old college student. I lived in Florida, in a fairly large house in Orlando, with a rather large property with a big pool outside. I was living with my parents at the time, and they both owned their respective businesses and frequently traveled for meetings and conventions and whatnot. One week in mid-May, when both of my parents were away, I asked their permission, and they allowed me to invite a limited amount of friends over to have a pool party in the backyard. I was excited and quite surprised that my parents trusted that I would be responsible enough to have a small party, promising no alcohol, no loud music, and to send everyone home at a reasonable hour, as to not disturb the neighbors. I proceeded to call 6 of my best friends and let them know about the pool party, inviting them over the following evening with a limit of 1 guest per person. Everyone replied almost instantly, totally down to come over, asking if they should bring over snacks and drinks. Remembering what my parents said, I ignored their conditions and allowed my friends to bring alcohol. The following night at around 8 p.m., almost all of my friends who I invited showed up with their bathing suits and plenty of alcohol. My friends took turns playing music on my Bluetooth speaker. They all brought their girlfriends or guy friends that were all acquaintances of mine, totaling 13 people including me. I started the backyard fire pit, and we started drinking, laughing, making idle chit-chat, and some of my friends decided to go into the pool. Most of my friends jumped in off the diving board, and I sat by the fire watching them splash, pick their girlfriends up, slam them in the pool, and have a good time in their now drunken state. Almost 2 hours passed, and I remember what my parents said about allowing guests to stay late. It was now approximately 10:30 p.m., and most of my friends were still in the pool listening to music and occasionally coming out for snacks and more booze. Myself in a rather drunken state, I kind of lost track of time. I went inside of my house for a few moments to grab another beer when I heard leaves rustling from the bushes on the side of my property. Now keep in mind, my house is gated and has security cameras all around, so I didn't get too suspicious and I didn't think much of the sounds, figuring some of my friends may have made their way to the front of the house to either make out with their girlfriends or get ready to go home. At that point, it was already 11:30 p.m. I completely failed to adhere to all my parents' rules, which actually made me feel a little guilty. I went back outside with snacks and drinks and told everyone that it was almost time to end our evening. 10 out of the 12 of my guests were still in the pool screaming and horsing around, while the 2 others went missing. When I realized this, I went back inside, walked around the house, and heard laughing and moaning from upstairs in one of the guest bedrooms. Assuming that one of my friends snuck upstairs with his girlfriend to hook up and whatnot, I don't need to give an explanation. I was too drunk and lazy at the time to go upstairs and tell them it's time to leave. But before I returned to the backyard to finally close up shop, I heard blood-curdling screams come from the pool. I ran outside to find my pool filled with blood on the surface, with my friends screaming that one of their girlfriends was swimming, and felt an arm tug them down and must have had a knife cut them on their leg. All of a sudden, an unfamiliar face, a guy probably in his late 20s, with long scraggly hair, a scruffy beard, tall with a couple tattoos on his body, emerged from the pool and ran out in a pair of fatigue cargo shorts and bolted to the front of the house. A few of the guys tried to chase after him, but they couldn't find where he went. We all panicked and took my friend's girlfriend and went inside the house, with a couple from upstairs hustling downstairs to see what the commotion was. I locked the doors while calling 911 requesting an ambulance. When the police and paramedics came to my house, they took the injured girl into the ambulance, and the rest of my friends left the house, confused and shaken up by the events that just took place. The police and I went to review the security footage, and lo and behold, when I heard that rustling in my bushes, there was the guy, who somehow made it over my gate undetected, went to the side of the house and casually blended in, and went into the pool with the rest of the guests. Stupid me didn't think of checking the surveillance system. Too drunk and concerned about my friends having a good time, that I irresponsibly let an intruder enter my parents' property undetected. I gave the footage to the police, but to this day, they were never alike to identify the intruder. And of course, when my parents returned, they found out what transpired, scolded me, and never allowed me to have a party in the house again. I was once invited to a pool party when I was 17. One of the more popular kids in our school was throwing a high school graduation pool party one weekend where his parents wouldn't be home. The kid's name was Daryl, and he had a huge backyard with a nice in-ground pool perfect for pool parties, though most of us have big yards where we live because we're in a less congested town. I wasn't close with Daryl, so I hitched a ride with a couple friends who knew him better. When the 3 of us stepped into his backyard, it was packed. It was actually impressive how many kids were there. I'd say at least a quarter of the entire grade was at this party. We wanted to say hi to Daryl because it would be the right thing to do coming into his party. We asked a couple kids we knew if they'd seen him. They said they hadn't seen him for a while now. So we asked others and got similar responses. We soon realized nobody seemed to know where Daryl was. Maybe he was in his house with a girl or something. So we just went about our own business. We played beer pong, people splashed around the pool, and the night became a daze overall. I didn't jump in the pool because I didn't bring a bathing suit and I just didn't want to get wet. Throughout the night, I would hear other kids screaming, "Where's Daryl?" It seemed others were trying to find him because it was weird he hadn't been seen for nearly 2 hours. Me and the 2 friends I came with joined a little circle of people talking about how Daryl hadn't been answering his text for a couple hours. Still, people were just chalking it up to maybe him being upstairs with a girl. Who knew? It was his party after all. Anyway, some more time passed and I had to go to the bathroom. There were a bunch of people inside the house, and there was actually a line for the bathroom. I opened a door in the hallway, and it led to the basement. My house had a bathroom in the basement, so I figured there was a chance this one did as well. I turned on the light in the basement and walked down. I started looking for a bathroom. There were only 2 doors down there though. The first one led to a closet. There was another door on the other side of the basement. It was shut, so I went over to it and tried the doorknob. It was locked. I knocked on the door. There was no answer. The thing about this lock though, it seemed I would be able to pick it unlocked simply using my fingernail. So I did just that. I knocked again before opening the door. I was expecting to see a bathroom, but instead I saw a big pitch black room. It seemed to be a boiler room. However, there was the faintest little yellow light emanating from what appeared to be some kind of boiler machine in the far corner of the room. And in that light, I could see a person, surely a person, standing right in the back of the room. My heart dropped when I saw the person duck down behind something. I thought, what if that was Daryl? I looked for the light switch and found it. It was one of those hanging switches that you pull down. I turned the lights on and went over to where I saw the person hide. The room was cluttered with tables and a washer and dryer machine, so the walking space was kind of arranged in a circle. When I got to where I saw the person not even 20 seconds earlier, I saw Daryl laying on the floor in a bloody mess, apparently passed out. I looked back up to the door to the boiler room when I heard footsteps coming from that direction. There was someone rushing out the doorway, but for a split second they looked back and I instantly recognized the face of a kid named Todd from our grade. He was a very quiet kid that creeped out a large amount of people in our grade. Instead of calling the cops and tending to Daryl, I ran upstairs hoping to catch up to Todd to make sure there were other witnesses to his presence there that night. I made it upstairs to the hallway and started to scream for people's attention. Everyone who was in the living room came to look and could see Todd rushing out the front door. They saw him. They were now witnesses to his being there. I told them all to come downstairs and see what he did. I would have considered rushing to tackle him, but I didn't know what weapons he had on him. When we all got downstairs, we saw multiple stab wounds in Daryl's legs. First thing we did was call 911 for police and an ambulance. Daryl was rushed to the hospital, while at least 10 people vouched for me when I saw a kid in our grade named Todd at the scene of the crime. That same night, police apparently raided Tom's house and he was arrested. I'm pretty sure he's still in jail, not sure if they got him for attempted murder or what. Daryl is fine now, but everyone believes that Todd did what he did out of jealousy of Daryl's popularity. Todd didn't seem to have any friends in school and would often be picked on by kids in Daryl's friend group. I'm not saying Todd was justified at all, but it's scary what bullying can drive some people to do. When I bought my first house, I had a pool party on a Friday. It was supposed to be my housewarming party. I had a few of my closest friends over. Everyone drank a bunch, and a few hours later, people were on their way out. A couple friends were a little too drunk for me to allow them to drive home, so I offered them spots on the couches to sleep. I'll call those 2 friends Rob and Dan for the brief mentions they'll get in the story. By the time I went upstairs to brush my teeth and get ready for bed, I thought both Rob and Dan had already passed out on the couches downstairs. When I got into my room to change into my pajamas, I heard a splash in the pool in my backyard. I actually muttered to myself, what the hell are they doing? I went to the window to look out to the pool, and in the pool was one of them just standing in there. I was pissed because I knew there were no more towels outside, and now they'd have to bring their drunk asses in dripping all over my carpets downstairs. I opened the window and called out to whichever of them it was to get the hell out of the pool. Then, they turned their head to look up at my window. I had to squint my eyes because I couldn't tell if it was Rob or Dan. Whichever it was wearing a black shirt in the pool. I couldn't remember who was wearing what from earlier, to be honest. But whoever it was, they just had a staring contest with me. Like, for over 10 seconds, whoever it was just looked up at my window at me. I had grown impatient with them, so I went downstairs with my shoes on. But I froze at the bottom step when I saw both Rob and Dan fast asleep on either couches in my living room. My next course of action was running to the kitchen to grab the biggest kitchen knife from my knife holder and running outside. I turned the backyard light on before I went out so I could see. The pool was now empty. I walked to the edge of the deck to the pool and stopped. I looked into the pool, making sure no one was hiding at the bottom. Then I looked out to the further depths of my backyard, by the trees and bushes. In one of my trees, I was 90% sure I saw someone sitting on one of the thicker, lower branches. Even with the knife in my hand, I was still way too scared to go out there and confront the situation. I went back in my house, locked the door, and shut the blind on the door. I sat in the living room on the ottoman, feeling slight comfort being next to both Rob and Dan, even though they were asleep. I sat there just thinking and shaking when I heard this. A tapping at the sliding door to the backyard. I woke up Rob and Dan now, asking the two to check the yard with me. They came to the door, took one peek outside, and when they didn't see anything, they said ignore it and go back to sleep. It was the worst reaction I could have expected from them. Someone I didn't know was out there playing some kind of fucked up game with me, and it was honestly terrifying me. I stayed up that whole night, checking my window every few minutes just to make sure no one was in my pool. I didn't actually go to sleep until the sun started coming up. By the time I woke up, my friends were already gone. I texted each of my friends who came over to confirm they weren't out there messing with me or whatever. I then went to the backyard to do some detective work. I didn't find much, but I did find a mini stepping ladder planted right in front of the tree that I was so sure I saw someone sitting in last night. I grabbed the ladder and went to go put it back in the shed. However, I stopped when I saw someone looking out the small window of the shed. It was someone I didn't know. I dropped the ladder and ran to my house to call the cops. I stood by my kitchen window watching the shed the whole time I was on the phone with the police. And at one point the door to the shed opened, and some tall, creepish-looking dude with messy, medium-length black hair and a black t-shirt and cargo pants stepped out and walked to the gate. I gave the exact description on the phone, as well as to the cop who came to my door. I told the cop the whole story, but in the end, there wasn't much he could do other than write down the description of the guy. He suggested I install some security cameras and went on his way. And a week later, I already had a camera system installed. I'm a single mother of two. My ex-husband and I take turns watching the kids month to month. My son Luke is 15 and my daughter Melissa is 10. This happened just a few months ago. I did some late-night grocery shopping after work. Luke had texted me earlier that he was going out with his friends. It was a Friday night. I wasn't thrilled with him leaving Melissa alone, but 10 is the age a lot of parents are more comfortable leaving their kids alone, and he knows I can't expect him to babysit her anymore. I got back to the house around 9 o'clock at night. I had to make 3 or 4 trips from the car to the house because of the amount of groceries I bought. I always overdo it with the groceries on the months I get to watch the kids. And then on the months alone, I'm the complete opposite. When I finally finished putting all the groceries in the fridge and pantry, I went upstairs to greet Melissa. I heard the shower running in the bathroom, so I went back downstairs to lay down in the living room and put on my show on Netflix. I was halfway through an episode, and I still hadn't heard Melissa leave the bathroom upstairs. Long hot showers aren't free, and I never condone my kids wasting water. I went up there to knock on the door and tell her to get out of the shower soon. I went back downstairs to resume my show. Only for about 5 minutes, though. Melissa was still in the shower, so I went back up there again and knocked louder. This time I waited for her to acknowledge me, but when she didn't, I continued to knock louder and yell her name angrily. It took me a little bit to notice through the bottom crack of the door that the light was off in the bathroom. I tried the doorknob, but the door was locked. The locks on my doors inside the house are easily unlocked with a fingernail, though, so I had to force my way in, now growing concerned. As the door opened, I yelled into the room at my daughter, at that moment feeling more furious than anything. I flicked the light switch up and went over to the tub. I yanked the curtain half open, honestly not knowing what to expect. But not in my worst nightmare would I have expected to find some 50-something-year-old withered-looking woman laying flat in the bathtub with the shower spraying water onto her. I screamed so loud and long until I lost the ability to scream for a few seconds. I had my back pressed up to the mirror. Everything on the counter had fallen to the ground. I felt an unexplainable sense of shock and horror. The woman stood up in the tub looking at me, her hair and clothes obviously drenched. I slammed the bathroom door shut and screamed Melissa's name. I checked her room first thing, and I found her hiding under the covers. I grabbed her and tugged her out of the room. As we passed the bathroom door towards the stairs, that woman was standing in the doorway of the bathroom. Everything about her looked like a zombie. Her eyes, her movement. I made sure to grab my cell phone before locking the two of us in the spare room in the basement. I called the police, and as I waited for the police to come, Melissa told me she thought it was me who came into the house, but when she saw some random, scary-looking woman walking up the stairs, she ran to her room to hide. Luke left the front door unlocked when he left. The police showed up in a timely manner. I talked to the police and told them exactly what Melissa told me. I described the woman's appearance, noting she was also soaked, and because of that I couldn't give a good description of her hair besides long and graying. This was all after making sure the woman was no longer in the house. Not under a bed, not in a closet, not behind a shower curtain. She simply left the house as easily as she entered. It's likely she was drugged out of her mind. I'd never seen someone who looked like they were literally lacking consciousness yet still walking. I don't even know if I would have been able to press any charges on her if she was found, which she wasn't. And don't you worry, I properly scolded and reprimanded Luke. Always remember to lock your doors. This was over 15 years ago. We once went to this family resort in New York State. We took our two kids who were 4 and 6 at the time. This focuses on our 6-year-old Michael Jr. We were on vacation around Easter time, so the resort had a bunch of fun little festivities set up for the kids, like Easter egg hunts, Easter decorations during bingo, and someone walking around in a big Easter bunny costume. While we were in the dining hall one evening, the Easter bunny was walking around giving kids high fives. When he came over to our table, our 4-year-old Peter hid under the table crying, but Michael Jr. gave him the high five and wasn't afraid at all. The guy in the bunny suit walked away quickly, probably to get our son to stop crying. The next day there was an Easter egg hunt, which was in one of the fields by the kids' center of the resort. I watched the kids scrambling to collect eggs while my husband Mike was elsewhere. I'm not really sure what he was doing. The Easter bunny guy was walking around the field interacting with the kids. I noticed he knew to avoid Peter. Peter came running to me when the Easter bunny got near to him. He would do the same thing with Santa around the holidays. The guy in the bunny suit was interacting with Michael a lot. I found it kind of cute. I just didn't want Peter around him so that he wouldn't start crying again, so I brought him to the other side of the play area for a little while. When it looked like the Easter bunny was gone, I walked him back to where Michael Jr. was last, but I couldn't see him. I started calling his name. Then another parent came up to me and asked if I was looking for a boy wearing a red sweater. I said yes, and she told me the guy in the Easter bunny costume walked him out of the field area in the direction of the parking lots. She told me this in a slightly concerned-sounding tone. I picked up Peter and ran in the direction that the woman pointed. I ran faster than I ever could, while holding my son on top of it. Motherly instincts clearly kicking in, giving me an adrenaline boost. I saw the man in the Easter bunny costume holding my child's hand, approaching a black car. I screamed at the top of my lungs at him to get away from my son. Then I screamed Michael's name. They both turned to look at us, and the man let go of my son's hand. Michael ran over to me, not realizing at all the danger he was just in. The man in the costume said to me that he was trying to find his mom since he looked lost, but that was total BS. He was about to get in his car with my 6-year-old son. I tried to yank the mask off of him, but he shoved me and yelled at me to piss off. Then he got in his car and drove away. I tried to remember his plate number, but he was gone too quickly. I called my husband on my old archaic cell phone, and I brought my kids to the front desk of the resort to meet him there. They said the man in the Easter bunny costume didn't work there. I was livid, yelling at the front desk workers the whole time, who were apparently aware of the man, yet didn't stop him or question him. We threatened to sue the entire place. They ended up refunding us for our entire stay, which we gladly accepted. But I was mere seconds away from losing my kid forever. adopted our son Charlie at the age of 2. He's aware that he was adopted. We were honest with him about that ever since he started to learn to speak. He's now 7 years old. We don't have any children of our own because my wife can't have kids. Somewhat recently, my wife and I started noticing very strange behavior with Charlie. And what motivated me to actually sit down and write this was something my wife and I still can't explain. There's an upstairs toy room for Charlie since there's 2 extra bedrooms in our house. He has a big toy closet in there, and the whole room has a bunch of toys like a Lego table, action figures, and such. For the duration of about a month, at different times we'd hear Charlie talking to himself. Not like role-playing talking in his play, we'd overhear him speaking as if he were talking to another person in the room. The first time this happened, my wife wasn't home, but as I passed his playroom, I overheard him talking as if he had a friend in there, and I swear to God, I actually walked in just to make sure he didn't actually have a friend in there. When I walked in, I saw him sitting at his Lego table with a couple of his WWE action figures on top of it, but he wasn't currently playing with any of them. He was just sitting there blankly staring at me. I asked, "Who are you talking to?" He shrugged his shoulders. As weird as it was, I had to assume he was just playing. The next time something strange happened, it was a lot worse. This time my wife was at least home to witness it with me. We were in the kitchen, Charlie was in the backyard playing. We heard him laughing and talking suddenly, so my wife went to look out the window to see what he was doing. Then she called me over to look as well. What we saw was Charlie talking to thin air, as if he were talking to a person. It resembled him trying to show someone who wasn't there how to use the plastic sword in his hand. I expressed to my wife my concern. She said he may just have an imaginary friend. I told her I didn't know how I felt about that. She seemed to feel it was completely normal. Fast forward to like the 3rd or 4th instance. It was 9 o'clock on a school night, approaching Charlie's bedtime. He was in his playroom still. I was trying to be lenient with the bedtime and let him play for a few more minutes. I heard Charlie laughing and talking to his imaginary friend again. I curiously had to take a peek into the room. As I opened Charlie's door, I heard his closet door shut. I looked at Charlie, standing up in the dead center of the room, with his toys scattered around him. I asked him who's in the closet, and something on the inside of it fell. It sounded like a big plastic toy. I asked one more time who's in the closet in a yell. He said George. I swung the door open, expecting one of his little friends in there. Maybe my wife let him have a playdate or sleepover without telling me, but the closet was empty besides his toys. I picked Charlie up against his will and brought him to his room. I told him he was going to bed. Then I told my wife about the closet door closing on its own, and then the toy inside falling on its own. She thought I was messing with her at first, but then she saw I was serious. That night, I woke up to sounds from down the hall in Charlie's playroom. We sleep with the door open. I woke my wife and told her to follow me quietly. We tiptoed to the toy room. Charlie wasn't in there, but a distinct, loud clicking sound was coming from inside the toy closet. I opened it, showing bravery for my wife, and as I did, the clicking stopped. We dug for any kind of electric toys that may have made that clicking sound. Nothing, though. I think that was the night I became a believer in the paranormal. The next morning, I woke to my wife's scream. She was holding our wedding photo. It was cracked right down the middle, not just the picture in the glass, but the frame too. It was cracked perfectly down the middle, separating the two of us. We took Charlie and stayed with my mom for a week. Then, after a week, my wife and I returned to the house. We listed the house for sale, and after a few days of normalcy, we brought Charlie back to the house. But we moved out a month later. I work at a game development company in Orlando, Florida. It was a stressful couple of weeks for me, and I was really pressed for time before a game's deadline, so I had to stay at the office late almost every night that week. It was a rainy Wednesday night of that week. It was completely pitch black outside, with the occasional strike of lightning lighting up the place, and the sound of the rain pouring on my office window was helping me concentrate on my coding. There was one other person in the office at this point, my coworker Chaz. He was finishing up on his work as well. He was also pressed for time on a strict deadline. By now, it was easily between 8 and 9 o'clock, and Chaz knocked on my office door before telling me he was heading out. He asked if I was okay locking up the place, and I told him of course. Then he was off on his merry way. I heard the front door of our company's office slam shut behind him, and with that, I was alone. Our entire office is in the shape of an L. The entrance is at one end, and my office is down the short line of the L, basically the corner office. I had to keep myself awake as I was starting to doze off, so I went down the hall to the kitchen to heat up some coffee. Just a little bit, enough to keep me going for another hour. I leaned on the counter by the coffee maker, waiting for it to heat up, when I heard this. The sound of a door closing. I peeked my head out into the hall to look and see if anyone was there. I called out, yielding no replies. The door sounded like one of the smaller private office doors, not the heavier front door to the entire office. I left the kitchen to walk down the 2 halls, trying all the doors, which were locked. Then I got to my little hall, and all 3 doors in this hall were shut, including mine. I left that door open 1000%, and there was no draft in here as all the windows were closed. I felt like someone had to still be in the office pranking me. I opened my office door with force, expecting someone to be in there jumping out at me, but no. My office was how I left it. The chair, my computer, everything. It was just a little odd to me that the door closed on its own because it had never done that, but I moved past it and continued my work. The rain continued to hit the window, and the lightning continued to strike about once every minute, startling me a few times actually. Some more time passed, and it was now getting very late to still be in the office. I was content with the progress I made, so I saved all of my work and began closing down my computer. I clicked the shutdown button, then turned off the screen. The screen went black, and then I saw it. In the reflection of the computer screen, I saw behind myself a woman standing there. I don't know how I didn't jump or scream, but I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I didn't turn around. I just got up from my desk, calmly grabbed my bag, pretending not to have noticed, and walked to the door. I didn't look back to shut the door or anything. I walked down the hall until I thought I was far enough away. Then I booked it out the exit of the entire office. I then ran down the flight of stairs to the first floor, then out to my car in the rain. The whole time I was terrified I was being followed, or that she would grab me any second, whoever it was. Once I got in my car, I took a second to breathe. Then I looked up at the window to my office. The light was still on in there, and I'm quite sure I saw a small kink in the blinds, as if someone were on the other side looking down at me. I called one of my bosses, Miranda, at once, and she confirmed no one else should have been there. She said she'd call the night security guy and ask him to check the office. Luckily, I got to go the hell home. Later that night, Miranda called me and said the security guy was in the office but didn't see anyone. I told her what I saw one more time, and it freaked even her out. There's only one camera in our entire office, and it's at the end of the longer hall by the kitchen area. The camera footage never caught any woman walking around the office that night. A long time ago, I did security work in an office building in Midtown Manhattan. It was mid-November, so one of the offices was looking to start decorating their office space with Christmas decorations, which were held in the basement along with other storage. I usually stood in the lobby area of the building just as general security. It was usually an uneventful job for the most part. But on this cold November Monday, my view of this job changed entirely. An employee of this dermatology office on one of the upper levels of the building apparently had gone down to the basement and had reported that all the lights were out and that the elevator wasn't running to the basement floor. This sounded like the electrician's job, until I was also told that there were multiple broken-in doors down there, implying a break-in over the weekend. That's when it became my job to go down there and investigate. Since the elevator wasn't going down to that level, I would have to take the stairs down there. I was going down there alone since I was the only security guard on duty that day. I took a flashlight with me down there since the power was out. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't nerve-wracking going down there alone. On this level was just storage, electrical components, and janitorial equipment. It was a small maze of corridors with different rooms, and navigating this in the dark with nothing but a flashlight was making the hairs on my body stand up. There were different doors in the corridors, which would lead to different storage rooms for many of the different businesses that rented office spaces in the building. And the call turned out to be true. Many of these doors were bashed in, Some of them were so badly damaged that they looked like they were destroyed with an axe. This was more serious than I thought. I was just a security guard. I didn't make enough money to go searching for potentially dangerous people in the basement without a gun. I looked into each room with broken down doors, but each room still seemed to be full with supplies. I couldn't find any trace of theft, but someone clearly came down here with a purpose. I continued looking into the rooms, just peeking in for a second with my flashlight. Then I heard a slam elsewhere in the basement. And suddenly everything went dead silent. The basement noises I was hearing before, from whatever they may have been coming from, a boiler, the pipes, whatever it was, stopped. And I was now in a dead silent basement where I could hear every last sound. Every footstep I took now sounded 10 times louder. Someone was in the basement still, evident by that slam. It may have been another door. It may have been whatever caused the noises to stop. Stupidly, I called out, "Anyone here?" and my voice echoed down the corridor. I continued slowly back the way I came. I wasn't staying down there another moment. This was a job for NYPD at this point. I was almost to the stairs when I heard this heavy breathing coming up from around the final corner. I instantly knew it to be heavy breathing. I was scared shitless. Why was I put in this situation? I turned off my flashlight and tiptoed just a little closer to look around the corner, and weirdly the breathing stopped. I said one hello, then turned the flashlight back on. Even though the light wasn't aimed exactly in that direction, I still easily saw this extremely tall, hunched over figure facing the wall with some kind of long object that could have been a weapon in his hand. I say his because there was no way a person this big and this stature could have been a woman. I also saw their face turn in reaction to the light. It was this pale, abnormally long face. I think they were bald. Another reason I say it was a man, but I didn't look too long. I ran past the figure to the stairs, screaming back at him that the cops are coming, you need to leave now. I ran all the way back up the stairs, through the basement door, then locked it and called 911. A bunch of NYPD cars came, and it was a big thing. At least 4 police officers went down there. I felt pretty useless, I have to say, but removing a dangerous, armed, giant human from the basement with the lights off was not in my job description. I was in the lobby when the officers came back, alone. They didn't have that person I saw with them. They couldn't find him. One of the building's electricians came to fix the electrical issues in the basement. It had something to do with a circuit box in the basement being tampered with. With the lights back on, police still couldn't find anyone down there. There are multiple stairways back upstairs from the basement, which he may have left through. Everyone believed what I saw, though. Those doors didn't smash themselves open. I took sick days the next few days, and every night for a week, I'd lay awake, constantly checking around my room in the dark, scared I'd see some giant figure standing in one of the corners. I held my first job ever in 2002, and I worked at a call center during the graveyard shift. The office was in Makati, and it was a new site. The office layout was kind of in an elongated donut shape, with the donut hole being the elevator lobby / main doors, and the actual office space composed of 2 long hallways and 2 shorter ones. It was also a new site, so only half the office was finished, and the other half was still under renovation. So one long half of the donut was a fully operational production floor with managers' offices and a pantry, while the other long half was reserved for things like conference rooms, the nurse's office, storage, other admin stuff, restrooms, etc. And it was all unfinished. The conference room still had concrete floors, and wires were still sticking out from sockets and all that. While the production half was nice and bright and well lit, as any call center should be, the other half was only partially lit. To make matters worse, the guards would turn off the lights completely on that side, since they figured nobody was using it anyway. As a result, people didn't really hang out on that side of the office, and if you needed to use the restroom, you just kinda had to make a mad dash to and from it. 2 weeks into production, and my teammate, who was obviously very sickly to begin with, had a terrible migraine, and I suggested that she tell our team leader about it so that she could take a break. TL then told her to go visit the nurse's office, located in the unfinished half of the office, something we figured out only because of the sign above the door that we see whenever we go to the restroom. I was to accompany her, so that's what we did. We walked to the nurse's office, but found that the door was locked and nobody was inside, even though the lights were on. The door was the type with one of those vertical window panels on it, so we peeked in to make sure nobody was in there. We saw all the medical equipment and a sick bed, a desk, basically everything you'd expect to find in there, except the nurse. Thinking maybe he or she just went on break, we decided we'll just come back later. After half an hour or so, we did go back, only to find that the light at the nurse's office was off. I remember us being pretty pissed off at the thought that maybe the shift nurse had gone home, but we checked the door anyway to see if maybe there would be a sign or note with the nurse's schedule or whatever. I don't know why I did it, but I tried the door handle despite being aware there was no light on, and I was able to open the door to find that there was no nurse's office, despite the sign above the door saying that that's where it was supposed to be. And yes, that was the only sign. We checked over and over to make sure it was the right room. We were sure it was the same room we visited earlier. But instead of a decked out clinic, we found a room with a small nightlight in an exposed socket that cast only enough light for us to see the walls and floors were concrete. There were no finishes, no beds, no cabinets, nothing. It's like we dreamed up the clinic we saw earlier. A guard approached us at that point, asking what we were doing poking around in an unfinished clinic. So we told him what happened, and he of course thought we were making it up. While we were kind of trying to convince him that we weren't lying, we all suddenly stopped talking when we felt the temperature just drop. We shivered, our hair stood on end. My heart started racing, and nobody could speak for a minute. Finally, my teammate burst into hysterical tears, and the guard then nervously shooed us away and locked the door to the supposed nurse's office. We were escorted back to our team's bay, and we explained what happened to our team leader. He pretty much just sat there stunned as he listened to us. Since my teammate wouldn't stop crying and was starting to hyperventilate very badly, they had to send her to Makati Med. The incident was never brought up again. If you're a fan of horror, which I know you are, then you'll love Shudder, which is a video streaming service catered specifically to horror fans. And what better time of year than right now to curl up on a chilly fall night and watch a good scary movie? Shudder has the biggest collection of any horror, thriller, or supernatural films that you could think of, and you can stream on all of your favorite devices. Shudder's also home to many exclusive original movies such as Prisoners of Ghostland featuring Nicolas Cage and Great White, a killer shark movie perfect for any Jaws fans. And you'll never find yourself running out of things to watch, as new films that'll keep you on the edge of your seat are added weekly. I personally have always been a big fan of found footage films like the Blair Witch Project, so it was great for me to see VHS 94 added recently, which is yet another exclusive to Shudder. So get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes must-see titles like Vicious Fun, The Mortuary Collection, and PG Psycho Gorman, plus all the best horror documentaries and the hit Creepshow TV series from executive producer Greg Nicotero of The Walking Dead. To try Shudder free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and use promo code NIGHTMARE. Links in the description.
This happened on New Year's Eve back in 2017. I'm from Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and I was flying home after finishing up a semester at the University of Rochester. I had to stay at school a week after the semester ended for personal reasons, so I unfortunately spent Christmas relatively alone. The flight itself was fine, but I'd already been in a sour mood before I even boarded the plane. I'm a big Browns fan, and as I was at the airport, the Browns lost their final game of the regular season to go 0-16, completely winless. And as a lifelong fan, it was a special kind of misery. I think we were the first team to go winless since like the 80s or something. To top it off, my flight was delayed, which ruined my family's plans for the night. Originally, we were all supposed to drive to my cousin's house together for a New Year's Eve party and stay the night. But because of the delay, my parents decided to leave early, taking the main car. I was stuck driving the spare car alone. My mom tried to make it up to me by leaving Vera, our golden retriever, behind to keep me company. I wasn't thrilled about making the trip solo, but Vera was always good company. I figured I'd make the most of it. By the time my Uber dropped me off from the airport, it was creeping on 10 o'clock. I didn't even bother unpacking, I just jammed all my stuff in the car, got Vera, locked up the house, and got on the road. The drive itself wasn't anything special, just miles of Ohio backroads winding through empty fields and patches of forest. There wasn't much snow on the grounds, just a light dusting, which was nice since I hated driving in the snow. It was pitch black dark though. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional farmhouse with its porch light glowing faintly in the distance. About halfway into the trip, Vera started whining. At first, I thought she just wanted attention, but then she stood up, pacing in the passenger seat. That's when I realized she needed to go to the bathroom. I groaned, knowing there wasn't much else I could do but pull over. The next clearing I came across was small, barely enough space for the car, but it would have to do. I remembered noting to myself how dark it really was out there. If not for the patches of white snow here and there, I probably wouldn't have been able to see into the woods at all. I jammed my hands in my pockets and tried my best not to freeze to death. Vera didn't seem to care about the cold or the darkness. Classic golden retriever. I let her out, not even bothering to leash her. She sniffed around the edge of the trees, taking her sweet time. She didn't wander far, just enough to do her business. And that's when I heard it. All of a sudden, a loud crashing sound echoed from somewhere in the woods. It wasn't just a branch breaking. It was heavier and deliberate, like someone or something was moving through the trees. I literally jumped from how loud it was. Imagine a grown man sprinting through the forest. That's genuinely what it sounded like. I scanned the darkness, squinting to make out anything, but it was too dark to see beyond the first few trees. Before I could react, Vera bolted directly into the woods. It was some worst nightmare type stuff, I'm telling you. She disappeared into the trees, and I lost sight of her in mere seconds. I yelled her name over and over, but she didn't come back. At that point, my heart was racing, and it started getting hard to breathe. The cold didn't help matters. I couldn't leave her out there, that wasn't an option. Without thinking, I ran into the woods blindly, yelling for her to come back. I didn't want to think about what she was chasing after, so I just ran, letting the adrenaline take over. The only light to aid me was my dim phone flashlight and the thin layer of snow on the ground. It was so dark I was practically running into the trees. I kept running, praying I'd find her before she caught up to whatever was in there. I ran until my lungs gave out from the cold, forcing me to take a break. After nearly falling over from exhaustion, I leaned up against a tree and felt myself about to break down. I honestly didn't know what to do. And then finally, I saw her. She was crouched low and shivering, walking slowly toward me. Her tail was tucked tightly between her legs. I had never seen her like that before. I dropped to my knees and embraced her. Relief flooded through me. She pressed against me and I could feel her body trembling. Something had terrified her. That's when I snapped back to reality and realized how serious the situation was. We were still in the middle of the woods, and there was still something out there. I sprung up from my position and told Vera to follow me. This time she obeyed and stuck by my side like her life depended on it. We started back to the car, but I had no idea if I was going the right way. As if things weren't bad enough, I damn near jumped out of my skin when I heard crashing from behind me. I didn't think, I just started running. Vera darted ahead of me and I followed her, praying I didn't trip. The crashing sound didn't stop this time. It seemed like it was following us. I can't even tell you how scared I was in that moment. I genuinely felt like I was going to die. By some miracle, Vera led me straight back to the car, and I practically threw her inside before slamming the door shut. As I was jumping in the driver's seat, I glanced back towards the woods, and my stomach dropped. There were 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. I jammed the keys in the ignition and floored it out of there. I didn't stop, I didn't even slow down. I was still in shock. It wasn't until I'd driven a few miles that I noticed Vera was bleeding. I started panicking as I realized there was a cut just below her shoulder blade. Someone had stabbed her. I slammed on the brakes and ran around the car to the trunk. My mom always kept a first aid kit in every car, and for once, her insistence on being overly prepared paid off. I cleaned Vera's cut as best I could and wrapped it in gauze. She whimpered, and I worried that I was hurting her, but I knew I was doing the right thing. For the first time since the whole sequence had started, I felt myself begin to relax. It was over. I tried not to think about it for the rest of the drive, but I was just so shell-shocked that something like that had happened to me. I ended up not telling my parents or relatives. I don't know why. It just felt like one of those things you keep to yourself. What I'm about to tell you is something I still think about often, especially during this time of year. This happened on New Year's Eve a few years ago. I was driving to my parents' house to celebrate the new year with them. They live a few hours away in upstate Pennsylvania, so I'd left in the late afternoon, figuring I'd get there with plenty of time to spare. The drive was supposed to be simple. I'm the type who really enjoys long drives, so a nice peaceful drive would give me some much needed time to think. But the weather had other plans. The snow started falling about an hour into my drive. At first it was light, just flurries dusting the windshield. Nothing to worry about. I thought the snowfall was actually quite pretty, but I'm pretty sure I jinxed myself. The further I drove, the harder the snow came down. It just kept falling and falling until I was literally in the middle of an honest-to-God blizzard. The highway turned slick and visibility dropped to almost nothing. My car, a little sedan, isn't exactly great in snow, so when the tires started slipping on even the smallest hills, I knew I had to pull over. There was no point in risking my life. It was my own fault for not planning out the drive better. I found a spot on the shoulder, far enough off the road to avoid passing cars, not that there were many. I texted my parents about my situation, and they seemed worried sick. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but I honestly wasn't too sure about that myself. I figured I'd wait out the worst of the storm, hoping it would just ease up, but the snow didn't let up. In fact, it only seemed to get worse from that point. It just kept coming, piling up around the car and on the road ahead. After an hour or so, it became clear I wasn't going anywhere that night. My dad offered to try and get out to me, but I told him that that was a death wish. I told him that if the snow didn't let up, I'd call the police, which he begrudgingly accepted as a decent solution. I really didn't want to call the police, and I didn't have AAA either, so that wasn't an option. I told myself the storm would have to let up eventually, and I decided that if it didn't by the time I got tired, I'd call the police. The thought of spending the night in the car made me uneasy. I didn't want to run out of gas trying to keep warm, and I was worried about killing the battery if I kept the lights or heat on too long. I sat there, turning the engine on and off every so often, trying to conserve what I could. The wind howled outside. I was starting to feel the weight of the isolation when I looked at my rear view and saw headlights cutting through the storm from behind me. I literally wanted to jump for joy. A snowplow pulled up beside me. I was saved. I rolled down the window as the driver leaned out of his. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s. He looked nice. He was wearing a thick jacket and had a black knit hat that was pulled down over his ears. I remember thinking his face was really wrinkly, if that makes sense. It looked weathered, like he had spent decades in harsh conditions. I expected him to say something, but he just stared at me for what seemed like an unusual amount of time. Eventually, he spoke, asking me if I was okay. He had a really gruff voice, definitely a smoker, and it was honestly kind of off-putting. I told him that I didn't think my car could handle the conditions, trying to be friendly but also keep my voice steady. He nodded, saying that I wouldn't get far in a storm like this, especially with the car I had. He paused for a few moments, as if he were considering what to say. I watched his eyes scan my back seat, like he was looking for something. I was just about to respond when he offered to give me a ride. I hesitated. I didn't know him, and yeah, he seemed a little strange, but he struck me as a genuine guy. Plus, staying put with my car all night would have been stupid. I asked him if he could drive me to where I was going, and he said it would be no problem. I then asked him what I should do about my car, to which he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Leave it." After a moment, I agreed. I grabbed my bag and climbed into the cab of the plow. At first, the warmth was comforting. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease as I settled into the seat. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him about my parents' house. I gave him directions, and he nodded again, but didn't say much after that. The silence wasn't awkward, but as the minutes passed, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. That's when I noticed something odd. He wasn't driving in the direction of my parents' house. I knew because the navigation was literally pointing in the opposite direction. I mean, we were on a local highway. There were only 2 ways to go. I tried my best to sound calm and asked him if we were going the right way in the most normal tone I could muster. I don't think I did a good job, though, because I could feel his demeanor slightly change with my question. Without looking at me, he told me we were taking a short detour and that the back roads would be better than the highway. I didn't know the area well enough to argue, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. We drove a little longer, and he did in fact get off the highway and start driving along some back road. At least the GPS said we were heading in the right direction. So I thought I was just being paranoid. Something in my gut was still telling me he was off though, so I started looking around the cab more closely. There were red flags everywhere. Empty liquor bottles rolled on the floor near his feet. There were torn up maps stuffed into the side pockets, and I caught a glimpse of a knife wedged between the seats. I felt my heart start pounding. You know that feeling where your heart just starts beating like crazy and you're worried other people can hear it? That's what was happening to me. By that time, I was also positive we weren't going the right way. The GPS kept recalibrating because he missed turn after turn, not even looking at it. I was panicking. As we continued driving, I spotted a house in the distance. It was the only one I'd seen for miles. I had to act. It felt like a lifeline. I waited until we got closer, took a deep breath, grabbed the door handle, and then kicked the door open as hard as I could. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I slammed into the ground and felt my leg flare up with pain. I didn't care though. I got to my feet and started running toward the house. The man shouted something at me, and I glanced back to see him fumbling for something in the glove box, probably going for a gun for all I knew. I didn't look back again. I sprinted through the snow, trying not to slip until I reached the house. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. A man and woman opened it, and they basically pulled me inside. I collapsed onto the floor, trying to catch my breath. I told them what had just happened, and they didn't ask questions. They just called the police. By the time the cops arrived, the snowplow was gone. They said they'd keep an eye out and search the area, but in that storm, finding him was unlikely. They offered to give me a ride to my parents' house, and even helped me call someone to tow my car. I was beyond grateful. My dad was furious once he found out, and I haven't driven in the snow since. I always think about what might have happened had I not jumped out of the car when I did. I've never been one for parties, even in college. I got sick of the whole going out culture pretty quickly, and I found that I always had more fun doing something meaningful with a few close friends. I'm from a rural area, northwestern Ontario. This happened a couple years ago. Ever since I was a kid, my dad and his buddies had a New Year's Eve tradition of going ice fishing while everyone else was celebrating the New Year however they celebrated. My mom wasn't really in the picture, and we didn't have much extended family, so I grew up spending New Year's Eve on a frozen lake in the frigid cold with my dad, his brother, my brother, and my dad's friends. My dad isn't around anymore, and my brother moved to Chicago a number of years ago, but I still try and go ice fishing as much as possible, especially as a way to celebrate New Year's Eve. I'm not really sure why. I just feel like I have some kind of obligation to keep the tradition going. My two best friends, Nate and Trevor, are pretty rugged guys themselves. You know the type, those burly, lumberjack-looking dudes that seem more in touch with wilderness than society. That's honestly how I describe myself too. Anyway, the three of us tried to keep the tradition alive as best we could, which was great because spending New Year's Eve alone would be depressing as hell. Nate was the one driving that day. His truck was perfect for the job. Big tires, four-wheel drive, and enough room in the back for all of our gear. We'd packed everything we needed: rods, tip-ups, bait, a sled to haul everything, and a small pop-up shelter to shield us from the worst of the cold. The forecast predicted a clear night, But in Ontario, you never trust the weather reports entirely. We were prepared for anything. At least, we thought we were. The lake we were heading to wasn't a well-known spot, and that's what we loved about it. It was tucked away, surrounded by thick trees with a surface that stayed frozen solid even in the milder parts of winter. It wasn't a place you'd stumble across unless you knew exactly where to look. As Nate navigated the snowy back roads, the excitement started to build. There's something about the quiet stillness of ice fishing. Just you, your friends, and the promise of the catch. Definitely beats drinking beer after beer at some random bar. As we pulled up to park near the trailhead, I noticed someone standing nearby. He was a few yards away, bundled up in heavy winter gear, but something about him didn't feel right. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at our truck. At first, I thought maybe he was just a fellow angler sizing us up, but then I saw him glance down at his phone, then back at us, then back at his phone again. For some reason, it didn't feel casual. I don't really know how to explain it. It just felt off. I muttered to my friends that that guy was creeping me out. The two of them looked up. Trevor shrugged his shoulders and Nate nodded but didn't say anything. We were about to start unloading when the man suddenly rushed towards us, waving his arms wildly. I rolled the window down to hear what he was saying. He started screaming that we needed to come help him immediately and that his buddy had just fallen through the ice. He pointed at his phone, saying the other guy they were with just told him. He sounded frantic, and his desperation was definitely real. We didn't even think. Trevor opened his door, and then we were all out following the man as he took off down the trail toward the lake. We didn't stop to grab anything, not even our coats. The urgency in his voice was enough to override any second thoughts. The man was practically sprinting, and we had to jog to keep up. As we got closer to the lake, I started to notice something that didn't sit right. He wasn't leading us to the usual fishing spots. Instead, we were heading toward a more remote part of the shoreline, away from where the ice was thickest. I was about to stop following, but it was too late. They appeared in view before we could do anything. Two more men standing near the edge of the lake. They weren't dressed for fishing, and they weren't moving. They were just standing there, waiting. I glanced down at their hands. They were both armed. My blood ran cold. One of them yelled at us to stop right there as we approached. He raised his gun and pointed it directly at me. I honestly can't describe the feeling that you get when someone points a gun at you. I hope no one ever has to experience what I felt that day. My heart dropped as the man we'd been following turned to face us, a smirk creeping across his face. We'd been set up. The second guy demanded Nate's keys, along with everything we had on our persons. We didn't really have a choice. These guys didn't seem like they were messing around. Nate reached into his pocket and tossed the truck keys to the man, and the three of us emptied our pockets. I tried to hang on to my phone, but one of the men told me phones too. Nate said his was in the car, which they laughed about. I've never been more furious in my life. How could we have been so foolish? I clenched my fists, wishing those guys weren't armed. I would have taken all of them on. Within moments, they grabbed everything and walked us back up the path at gunpoint before one of the men sped off in Nate's car. The other two backed away into the woods, presumably to their own vehicle. I debated following them, but I figured that wouldn't be much help. We stood there for a moment, shivering, before Nate pulled out his phone. I knew he had lied about it being in the car. I honestly don't know what we would have done had he not thought quickly on his feet. Somehow, we still had service. He called the police, explaining everything as calmly as he could. The dispatcher told us to stay put, and we huddled together for warmth as we waited for help to arrive. I was still so unbelievably angry. Nate was the worst, though. He kept kicking nearby trees and cursing at the top of his lungs. There was nothing Trevor or I could do to calm him down. The whole thing had happened so fast. I was honestly still processing it all. Why the hell would there be people out in the middle of nowhere on New Year's Eve of all days? It didn't make any sense. I'll skip all the boring details. The cops took an official report and were gracious enough to drive us all back to Trevor's house, which was the closest. As you might expect, Nate's car was never located, and those people were never caught. The three of us still can't believe what had happened. Trevor thinks we just stumbled into the wrong people at the wrong time. That they weren't planning on robbing us, but we just so happened to be the perfect targets. I think that's possible, but it still feels so unlikely. Who just springs a trap on some random people in the spur of the moment? But it also wouldn't make sense for them to be waiting for us at such a secluded spot. They had no guarantee anyone would show up. I really have no idea what to make of this whole incident. This is one of my favorite topics that I've covered in the past. New house stories in which unsuspecting people who just moved into their new homes discover something or perhaps someone that shouldn't be there. But before getting into those, I want to thank DraftKings for sponsoring this video. DraftKings is an online, real money casino that lets you play whenever and wherever legally permitted. Choose from over 300 real money games, slots, blackjack, roulette, and live dealer games. With more real money games added regularly, DraftKings Casino is changing the game with new ways to play. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable, and if it's not yet available in your state, check out DraftKings Daily Fantasy app, where you have a shot at winning cash prizes all season long. Head to the DraftKings Casino app right now and sign up using promo code Mr. Nightmare, and when you play just $10, you'll instantly receive $100 in casino credits. This happened a few years ago, but it still gives me an unsettling feeling whenever I think about it. The only reason I'm talking about it now is because I feel like it's been long enough since it happened, and I won't risk anything by putting it on the internet. Back then, my wife and I had just moved into the suburbs from the city. We just had our third kid, and between the baby stuff, the toys, and the general chaos, our apartment felt way too cramped. We found a nice house in a quiet, safe neighborhood. The neighbors described it as the kind of place where you'd feel fine leaving the doors unlocked. The house itself wasn't massive, but it was definitely a step up from the tiny space we'd previously been living in. One of the features that caught my wife's eye was the backyard. It had this beautiful, slightly overgrown garden with a few old statues scattered around. They were weathered, a little eerie looking, like something out of Game of Thrones. I know it sounds weird, but my wife and I loved it, said it gave our yard character. I was pretty indifferent, so I left everything as it was, statues and all. I figured it was less work for me, which I was never going to complain about. A few days after we moved in, I was looking out the window, taking in the yard, when I noticed something odd. One of the statues, an angel I think, was facing away from the house. All the others were facing toward us, so it looked strange. I could have sworn they all faced the same direction, but I didn't really know for sure. I didn't think much of it, and just assumed I was misremembering things. The next morning, I looked out the window again, and that's when I noticed it. Another statue had turned around, again facing away from the house. This time I knew something was up. I had never been more sure about anything in my life. I asked my wife about it, but she just shrugged it off and said she hadn't noticed anything. I thought maybe it was my son Jimmy. He was a little prankster back then, always up to something. But when I asked him, he just looked at me like I was nuts. I doubted he'd do something like that anyway. I knew something was going on though, but I couldn't prove it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I tried to ignore it. Besides, I had bigger problems to worry about. I don't like admitting it, but money was really tight during that time, and I lived in perpetual fear that I was going to lose my job. A few days went by without anything strange, and I started to relax. But then, one evening, I looked out the window, and my heart nearly stopped. All of the statues were lined up in a row at the very edge of the house, just standing there. It was a freakish sight, like something out of a horror movie. I know it sounds ridiculous, but part of me could feel all those eyes looking at me. My breathing went shallow. I couldn't decide whether it was more scary or bizarre. I went outside to get a closer look, trying to make sense of it. Before opening up the back door, I took a few nervous glances around the yard to make sure there was no one out there. It was daylight, but I was paranoid. Eventually, I worked up the courage to open the door and go inspect the statues. I went to lift one of them and immediately realized something. Those statues were heavy, way too heavy for one person to move alone. I couldn't even budge one of them on my own. As I was debating what to do, my wife came outside. and the look on her face told me she was just as freaked out as I was. She suggested maybe some of the other neighbors were messing with us, trying to scare the new people on the block, but that explanation literally made no sense. We had met all of the neighbors, and they all seemed like fairly normal people. Plus, I had trouble believing that anyone sane would do this to a family with young children. This was harassment, not some harmless prank. We ended up calling the police, but as you might expect, they couldn't do much. They suggested putting up some security cameras, but we didn't have the money for that. I told the cops we would, but on the inside, I was really reluctant to do something so drastic. They left, and I guess I felt a little better, even though my wife was still extremely shaken up. My wife and I did everything we could to hide the situation from our kids. Say what you will, but we didn't want to scare them. Nothing happened the next day, or the next. I speculated that the cops had scared whoever was there away, which did track on many levels. So we tried to forget about it, even though neither of us really felt comfortable. I tried to assure myself that maybe my wife was right. Maybe it had just been a prank or something. That didn't do anything to calm my nerves, though. I was on edge, looking out the windows every time I passed by, half expecting to see the statues somewhere else. I hope no one ever has to experience the sensation of feeling unsafe in your own home. A few days passed without incident. I started thinking the nightmare was over, and for the first time in a while, the house was actually starting to feel like home. I could not have been more wrong. It was a weekend. I don't remember whether it was Saturday or Sunday, but it was definitely a weekend since my kids didn't have school. After some breakfast, I went outside to play in the yard with my kids, and that's when I saw it. Spray painted in big black letters on the back wall of our house were the words, "Go away." I nearly dropped my son when I saw it. Without thinking, I rushed my kids inside and told my wife to stay in the house with them. I don't know what came over me. I'm not that brave of a guy, but I started sprinting through the garden, screaming threats at whoever had vandalized my house. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and I was looking for a fight. No one was anywhere in my yard, though. Eventually, I gave up looking. As I was walking back towards the house, the adrenaline in me turned to outright fear. This was serious. Someone had left a direct message meant to scare us. They could have meant us harm, and I knew the situation was only going to escalate from there. The police came again and took down another report, but without any leads, there wasn't much they could do. I insisted that they stay on the property in case those people came back, but they told me they didn't have enough evidence to waste resources like that. As far as they knew, some teenage delinquents could have been behind the graffiti. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They told me they'd make sure a patrol officer was nearby, which I guess was some kind of consolation. My wife was twice as upset as I was, so I reassured her that we'd be okay, even though I was freaking out internally. That night, I was in the kitchen when I heard my wife scream from the living room. I ran in, and she was standing by the window pointing outside. I looked, and my stomach dropped. There were 5 people standing in our backyard, each of them wearing white face coverings. They were dancing around in this strange, jerky way, almost like puppets. We just stood there, watching them, too shocked to move. It was terrifying. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish, but it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. I snapped out of my haze and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife we had. I basically screamed at my wife to call the police, and while she was doing that, I ran out the back door with a knife in my hand. I screamed like a clinically insane person and took one step toward them before instantly regretting it. There were 5 of them and 1 of me. They could have been armed. Before anything else could happen, I turned and ran back inside the house like a coward. The knife must have scared them though, because they stopped dancing and ran into the garden, out of sight. I told my wife to run upstairs, find the kids, and hide, and I guarded the back door in case they tried to break in. By the time the police arrived, those people were gone. The police did a thorough search but couldn't find any trace of them. That was the last straw. I didn't care about the cost. I bought and installed security cameras the next day. My wife was hysterical for weeks after that, begging me to let us move somewhere else. I told her that if one more thing happens, that we would, but that we'd probably be screwing ourselves financially if it came to that. Luckily, the cameras must have done the trick, because those people never returned, and we never had another incident occur on the property. The scariest thing, though, is that we still live in the same house and never got an explanation for what happened. My wife Taylor and I recently moved out of our old home. She didn't like being so close to her family and wanted to put some distance between us and them, so that's what we did. We don't have kids, and she stopped working ages ago, so she was relatively amenable to my suggestions about where to move. I'm an electrician, so bouncing around isn't much of a problem for me. We eventually settled on New Mexico. We've both been rural people all our lives, so it wasn't that drastic of a lifestyle change. That was about 3 months ago, give or take. We found a fantastic deal on a place way out in the country. The house is honestly bigger than we really need, especially since it's just the two of us and our black lab Lola. But honestly, we figured we'd make use out of the extra space, maybe even host some of the friends we'd make. We'd been settled in for a few months when I started noticing something odd. The upstairs lights kept tripping circuits, but the rest of the house would still have power. After this happened once or twice, I knew exactly what the problem was. Like I said, I'm literally an electrician, so this kind of stuff is my bread and butter. I figured it would be an easy fix, just a matter of rearranging some of the load on the breaker, which in all likelihood was downstairs. Times like those make me happy that I'm the type of guy who knows how to fix things. To be honest, I hadn't spent that much time in the basement since we moved in. I didn't really have a reason to. We'd looked it over briefly when the realtor showed us the place, but I didn't pay much attention. Come to think of it, I don't think I'd been in there one time since then. Anyway, I walked down the stairs and started looking around for the main breaker. The basement was pretty cluttered and definitely not the type of space that could be easily used. It looked more like a storage room than a basement. Eventually, I figured out where the main was and started futzing around. After about 10 minutes, I realized where the load imbalance was and told myself I'd rewire it when I had more time. At that point, I was about to go upstairs when curiosity got the better of me. I figured since I was down in the basement already, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have a look around. After all, this is my house, and it was honestly a little strange that I didn't know every square inch of it. Like I said, most of it was filled with old furniture and a bunch of junk. There wasn't anything particularly interesting down there, and I eventually concluded that trying to transform it into a usable space would be way too much of a hassle. That's when I noticed something odd. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of old wooden chairs, was a large metal door. It was strange because this wasn't just any door. It looked industrial grade. It was also a lot taller than most normal doors would be, and seemed pretty thick too. I walked over to it, and my suspicions were confirmed. It looked like the type of door you'd see securing a walk-in safe or some kind of panic room. My first thought was maybe it was a tornado shelter or storm room or something, but that would be a weird surprise. You'd think the realtor would have mentioned a feature like that. I tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. It was locked. I immediately went upstairs and started rummaging through the drawer of keys the previous owner had left behind in case we locked ourselves out or something, but none of them worked on the door. I must have tried like 15 keys or something, but no luck. I eventually told Taylor about it, and she was just as curious about it as I was. I'm still not sure how, but she worked her magic, and we were able to get in contact with the previous owners. It was that exact phone call that took me from curious about the situation to downright concerned. They were a little odd on the phone and would pause every so often, like they were thinking carefully about what they were saying or trying not to say too much. Part of me wishes I had recorded the conversation, but hindsight is 20/20. When I asked about the door, they got quiet. Eventually, the wife said it was just a safe room in case of a tornado. I told her that was great, but we were unable to use it since it was locked. After another pause, she claimed they'd lost the key and told us to just ignore it. I thought that was extremely unlikely, since they had literally left us keys to random doors that we'd probably never need to lock. The way she said it gave me a really bad feeling in my gut too, but there was nothing I could do. We ended up hanging up almost immediately after that, as they were definitely not trying to make small talk. Taylor tried to laugh it off, told me I was overthinking it, but I couldn't let it go. Over the course of the next few weeks, I would occasionally wander down the stairs and just stare at that door, wondering what could be inside. I tried everything I could think of to open it, even some tricks I'd picked up from work. but it was no use. The lock was solid. I ended up giving up for about a week, but the curiosity ultimately got the better of me. Fast forward to 2 days ago, when things took a wild turn. After my wife's wishes, I decided to hire a locksmith. He came over, and I let him do his thing down there. After about 30 minutes, I went downstairs to check on him. He told me that the lock was unusually complex for a simple panic room. Those were his exact words. I was worried he wouldn't be able to get it open, but to my surprise, he actually managed to crack it after another half hour. I wish he hadn't. Inside, the room was set up like some kind of shrine. There were old black and white photographs on the walls, all covered in strange symbols that I didn't recognize. In the center was a chair, just facing the wall. It looked like someone had spent a lot of time sitting there, just staring at nothing. In one corner, there was a cot with crumpled blankets, and it smelled stale and kind of gross. Then I noticed the trash. Empty chip bags, crumpled water bottles. The realization smacked me in the face. Someone had actually been staying down there, and not that long ago. I was dumbfounded. I didn't think the situation could get much worse, but of course, that's what happened. As I was trying to take it all in, I noticed a second door on the far right side of the room. It was small and half hidden by the minimal light, but it was there. I opened it and realized it led to a set of stairs that led to the cellar door outside the house. I felt like such an idiot. I hadn't even had the foresight to check the cellar door when we moved in, since I just assumed it led to the basement. In all the time we'd lived here, I had never even opened it. My bewilderment at the whole thing soon became terror. Someone had literally been living in my house for who knows how long. Things started clicking in my brain. Since moving in, my wife and I had noticed a few weird things that we couldn't explain. Most of the time it was just things going missing. Until that point, I had just assumed my wife had misplaced things, which she did have a tendency to do. This discovery changed everything though. Someone had been living in our house. I had to repeat that thought a dozen times in my head before I could fully wrap my mind around what was going on. I didn't know who had been in there or why, but I knew I didn't want them coming back. I tried calling the previous owners, demanding an explanation, maybe even threatening legal action, but they wouldn't pick up. Either they disconnected their number or they just didn't want to deal with it. Taylor was freaked out, and I was too. That night, I took some heavy furniture and barricaded the cellar door from the inside. I found a heavy-duty looking chain and padlocked it shut for good measure. I didn't care what it took. There was no way I was letting someone sneak back in through that door. The police came and took down a full report before leaving, telling us they'd do their best to try and get in contact with the previous owners. We even called our realtor, who was horrified and said she'd assist the police in any way she could. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard it. There was a loud bang on the front door. Lola shot up, barking like crazy, and we both froze. Neither of us moved, just staring at each other, listening. After a few minutes, the banging stopped, but then we heard small rocks tapping against our bedroom window. Taylor held on to Lola, and I went to look out the window. Taylor begged me not to, but I was furious at that point. In my mind, I was preparing to fight whoever was out there. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and yanked the curtains away from the window, but I couldn't see a thing. We thought it was over. Taylor wanted me to call the police, but there was a little part of me that wanted to handle this myself. I knew the police would scare them away and call it pettiness, but I wanted to make sure whoever was out there got caught. I told her if one more thing happened, I'd call. But then from downstairs, I heard the sound of glass shattering. I sprinted downstairs just in time to see two figures running away from the house. The kitchen window was completely shattered. It was then that I called the police, who showed up not long after. They searched the house and the basement, but there was no sign of forced entry into the storm room. They didn't find anyone on the property either. Their best guess was that whoever had been living down there was angry when they realized they were locked out and decided to come back and scare us. I was both furious and horrified. My wife has been a wreck ever since. The police escalated the situation since an actual crime happened and said they're working on tracking down the previous owners, but that it could take a few days. That was 2 full days ago, and we still have not been able to get in contact with them. I think the police scared away those squatters though, at least for now, as they haven't been back to our house since. I'm actually shocked that something like this could even happen in the first place. If we can't get in contact with the previous owners soon, I have absolutely no idea what I'm gonna do. I'm fully prepared to defend myself, but I hope it doesn't come to that. When I bought my first house, I was only 27. I'd saved up for years, and even though it was just a small, modest place, I was proud of it. Moving in, though, that took some adjustment. I'd lived with my parents my whole life, along with 3 siblings and 2 dogs. The house was loud, always buzzing with life. But this was quiet. Really quiet. That was honestly the hardest part about the transition. The lack of noise. Living alone felt strange, and at first, I wasn't sure I'd ever get used to it. I'm sure anyone who's gone from living with family to living alone knows what I'm talking about. One thing I loved about the house was the tiny balcony on the 2nd floor. Don't get the wrong impression, I don't even know if I can really even call it a balcony. It was barely big enough to stand on, and I couldn't even fit a chair out there. Regardless, I'd go out there most nights after work to take a break and clear my head. I smoked pretty often, but I hated the smell, so smoking inside wasn't an option for me. The balcony was twice as beneficial for that exact reason. I didn't even have to go outside or leave the comfort of my own home just to smoke. It felt like a luxury. I'll describe the layout of the property so what I'm about to tell you makes sense. The block I lived on was pretty standard, with houses adjacent to each other all the way down. The street behind mine was exactly the same, meaning everyone's house would be sharing a backyard if it weren't for the 10-foot tall fences designating the property lines. From my balcony, I could see over my backyard neighbor's fence and into his yard. You could see the whole place, really. After a few weeks, I realized I'd met almost all the neighbors except him. Come to think of it, I don't think I had ever seen him, let alone have a conversation with him. The guy never waved and never came over. I never saw him in the yard or at the bedroom window. Nothing. It was like he didn't exist. If it weren't for the occasional bedroom light on at night, I would have assumed the place was deserted. I guessed that there was an old person living there since the grass looked like it hadn't been cut in years, and I never heard any sounds from their yard. After another week, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go introduce myself and at least put a face to the name. One Saturday, I walked around the block to his place, expecting to knock on the door and maybe make some small talk. But the house looked rough. Rough was an understatement. It looked completely untouched. The yard was a mess, overgrown with weeds, and the whole place looked like it had been ignored for years. The paint was chipping, some of the siding had been scratched off, and the walkway was stained. The doorbell was broken, so I gave a few loud knocks and waited. Nothing. I felt awkward standing there and started to wonder if maybe the place really was vacant. But then I saw a slight movement behind the window shade. Just a flicker, like someone was peeking out. That was enough for me. Someone was in there, spying on me, but wouldn't open the door for some reason. I turned to leave, when all of a sudden, the door flew open, slamming against the wall like someone had ripped it open in a violent rage. I jumped back, totally thrown off. I whipped around and found myself face to face with an elderly Asian woman standing in the doorway, staring at me. She was short, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her skin was wrinkled, but somehow tense, like she was flexing her face muscles, if that even makes sense. Her eyes were wide, unsettlingly wide. I can't even lie, I was pretty freaked out just looking at her. There was something off about her, like it looked like she was on something. She didn't say a word, just stared with no expression on her face. Eventually, I cleared my throat and introduced myself as her new neighbor. After a few seconds, she said her name was Priscilla and gave me a half smile. And that was it. She didn't even ask my name, she just stood there, watching me. I nodded and turned away, not knowing what to say. I left feeling more unnerved than I wanted to admit. I never heard the door close behind me, but I didn't want to turn around and get caught looking. Later that night, I went out to my balcony like usual, trying to forget about the strange interaction. At that point, I had no idea of the ordeal that I had just gotten myself into. When I glanced over the railing, there she was, that crazy-looking lady from earlier, standing dead center in her yard, looking straight up at my house. She didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there staring. It was one of those moments where you wonder if you're actually seeing what you think you're seeing. I didn't know if I should say something, wave, or pretend like I hadn't noticed her. It was one of the freakiest things I'd ever seen, and I didn't know how to handle it. I went back inside and told myself she was just a little messed up in the head, and that I shouldn't be getting worked up over a harmless old lady. But it didn't stop there. The following night, I saw her again, but this time, she was moving from one window to another inside her house, watching me from each one. Although I pretended not to notice her, part of me felt like she knew that I knew she was watching. I was hoping she'd stop, but she didn't. She was still looking at me when I finished smoking and turned to go inside. Out of curiosity, I peeked out one of my windows about 20 minutes later to see if she was still looking at my house. To my horror, she actually was. I called my dad, and he told me that she probably had dementia or something, and that she was most likely just lonely or confused. He told me that I should actually feel bad for her. It was kind of hard to feel bad for someone who was borderline stalking me, but my dad calmed my nerves and assured me that she was harmless. A few nights passed without anything weird happening. I didn't see her in her yard or at any of her windows. I thought maybe my dad had been right, and was starting to feel glad that I hadn't done something drastic. That is, until one morning, when I found a woman's sock on my side of the fence, just sitting in my yard. I stared at it, feeling a chill run through me. This wasn't just her strange behavior anymore. She'd been on my property. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to confront her, but I was starting to feel like I couldn't ignore it either. I should have called the police right there, but I didn't because I didn't want to create issues with a neighbor. That night, as I was laying in bed, the doorbell started ringing. Not once, not twice, at least a dozen times, one right after the other. I didn't even need to look. I knew it was her. In my tired haze, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was more annoyed than scared. I got up, threw on a shirt, and went to the door, telling myself I'd just ask her to leave me alone. I told myself that I'd been putting this off for long enough, and it was about time I dealt with it. I have no idea why I wasn't scared in that moment. I still look back and cringe at how flippantly I handled the situation. I don't even want to say I was naive, but I can't think of a better word to describe my attitude to it all. The second I opened the door, she lunged at me. She ran full speed at me with a kitchen knife in her hand, her face twisted in rage. She started screaming, yelling something about how I had taken her son from her. I barely had time to process what was happening. I grabbed her arm, managing to wrestle the knife out of her grip, and I pinned her down on the floor. She was easy to overpower, but that didn't make the situation any less terrifying. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking as I held her there and called the police. She was still screaming nonsense about her son and told me that she was going to kill me. At one point she tried to bite me, but I wasn't going to let her go until the police arrived. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. She never stopped screaming or squirming the entire time. When the police finally arrived, they restrained her and forced her into one of their cruisers. She screamed the whole time, and I could still hear her screaming even after they shoved her in the car. I had never been more scared in my life. The police made sure I was okay and told me she'd be sent to some kind of psychiatric facility. I never saw her again after that. This incident still weighs pretty heavily on my mind and has definitely made me a more paranoid and cautious person. I ended up moving out not even a year later. "3 years ago, my partner and I bought our first home. It was a modest place, and our neighbors were wonderful. Life was good. So good, in fact, that 18 months later, when those neighbors decided to sell their house, which was larger and had more luxuries like a driveway, a garage, and a bathtub, we jumped at the chance. We bought their house and put our old one right next door up for sale. After reading several motivation letters from potential buyers, we chose a Polish couple. They only spoke in English to us and not in Dutch like we did, but everything seemed normal. They asked for some tips about the house, and we had some pleasant, small-scale small talk. But looking back, that was the calm before the storm. Even before the big incidents, things felt off. We started experiencing bizarre disturbances at the strangest hours. Sometimes at midnight, we'd hear heavy banging or incredibly loud music blasting through the walls without warning. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to make us feel like we didn't truly know who was living a few feet away. The first red flag appeared when the neighbor came home with severe damage to both sides of his car. It looked like he had scraped against a guardrail at high speed on both sides. When we asked what happened, he gave a clumsy excuse: a concrete pole on one side and a trailer taking a turn too wide on the other. We chose to believe him, even though the math didn't add up. One evening around 6 p.m., the neighbor called us in a total panic. He claimed people were outside his house, turning his security cameras away. He begged us to check it out and call the police. We looked, and sure enough, 2 men were breaking in. We called the cops immediately. It took the cops 20 minutes to arrive, so the burglars were already gone. The neighbor's wife came racing into the street, parked her car, and frantically ran inside to her sweet little French bulldog, and the police, who were at the time already there. When I was walking my dog curiously, I saw the husband park his car 3 streets away and walk to the scene, as if he was hiding the vehicle from the police. But that thought didn't occur to me at the moment. Later, when we checked the doorbell footage, we saw the burglars standing there before the break-in, calmly discussing which house to target in Polish. Nothing was stolen, no one was caught. I told the police it felt like a setup, but I never heard back. A week later, I was at a housewarming party when my partner texted me, "The music next door is insanely loud again." A few minutes later, he called me, and his tone changed to pure terror. The neighbor's car had just come tearing through our front garden and slammed into the neighbor's own front door. 2 men were frantically loading the car with high-end electronics, like flat-screen TVs, professional speakers, and other expensive gear. They looked like the same men from the week before. This time, the police were a lot quicker. They arrived in exactly 7 minutes. The officers intercepted the men while they were still loading the car. When asked for ID, the men claimed they didn't have any. Then things got surreal. The man behind the wheel looked the officer in the eye and claimed to be my neighbor using my neighbor's actual name. But there was a catch. In the 9 months that they lived next to us, my neighbor had never spoken a single word of Dutch. This man, however, spoke fluent Dutch with a thick Polish accent. Realizing the game was up, the men slammed the car into gear, and a violent pursuit followed through our quiet streets until the police managed to box them in and arrest them. But my partner could still hear movement inside our neighbor's house. The police went back in and dragged out a 3rd suspect. As we were inside our own home with an officer to report the damage to our property, the doorbell rang. We turned around, and there he was, the actual neighbor. He was unrecognizable. His face was a swollen, bloody mess. One eye was swollen shut, his mouth was torn, and his arm hung at a useless angle, covered in what looked like defensive stab wounds. He looked feral, aggressive, and broken. The police officer tried to intervene, but the neighbor flat out refused to file a report or cooperate. Since the victim wouldn't speak, the officer had no choice but to send him back to his house. Later that night, the neighbor rang our bell again. He was trembling. He confessed that he cheated on his wife, and he claimed that she had sent people to take him out. He begged to sleep at our house. Terrified and wanting no part of this underworld drama, we refused. My partner offered to drive him to the hospital instead. We dropped him off at 10:30 p.m., telling him we were staying elsewhere for the night because we no longer felt safe. But we didn't stay elsewhere. We went home, locked every door, and tried to breathe. At around 1 a.m., our dog started growling. A specific low growl he only uses when someone's at the door. We checked the doorbell camera, and there he was. The neighbor was back from the hospital, standing on our porch, ringing the doorbell multiple times. We sat in the dark, watching the screen in silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, a car turned onto the street. The neighbor panicked. He scrambled off the porch and hid behind our cars in the driveway, crouching in the shadows. Watching this bloodied, broken man lurking in the dark behind our own cars was one of the most unsettling things I've ever seen. The car stopped, and a woman got out. It was his wife. She walked toward her front door, paused, and glanced at our driveway. She saw him. We held our breath, waiting for a confrontation, or worse. She walked toward him, and as she stepped into the pale yellow glow of the street lamp, she began to wail, a haunting, guttural crying. He didn't say a word, and she kept asking questions, her sobbing getting louder and louder, echoing through the empty street. Eventually, they both got into the car and drove away. We didn't see them for 3 days. We didn't even know where their dog was. The wife eventually returned alone. She found the dog inside, and she told us she doesn't think she'll ever see her husband again. Whatever the real story is, drugs, debt, or marriage turned lethal, I've realized one thing. I don't think I want to know. This all started back in 2017 when I moved into a new house in the suburbs of Montreal, Canada, with my parents and little sister. Before I get into the juicy part of the story, I need to explain a few details about my room and its placement in the house for everything to make sense from my point of view. The house we moved into is a split-level home, meaning it has staggered floor levels connected by short flights of stairs. My room was neither on the main floor nor in the basement. It sat exactly in between the two, at ground level. One wall shared space with the garage, and the opposite side had a large window that looked out into the backyard. At the time, that window had plastic vertical blinds with several missing panels, so even when they were fully closed, I could still see outside through the gaps. On the garage side of my room was my closet, which had large sliding mirror doors. This meant that when I was in bed, no matter which side I faced, I could always see my window reflected back at me. I started noticing things about a year after we moved in, when I was 15. I remember watching YouTube videos on my tablet late at night since I had trouble falling asleep. One night, I heard something outside my window. I had left it open because it was really hot and we hadn't invested in an AC unit yet, so I relied on whatever breeze I could get. After hearing what sounded like footsteps or shuffling, I quickly paused my video and put the tablet down. The noise stopped along with the video, which made me think it had just been part of what I was watching, or maybe my imagination. I resumed the video and heard it again. I looked to my left toward the window, but didn't see anything. So I eventually fell asleep. For a few nights, nothing happened. But then one night, a couple nights later, during my usual late-night YouTube and show-watching routine, I heard the shuffling again. I paused what I was watching and listened, this time longer than before. I swear I could hear breathing now, too. I glanced at my window, but again, there was nothing. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, and turned to face my closet instead. As I picked my tablet back up to resume the video, I saw something move at my window through one of the gaps in the blinds, reflected in the mirror. A chill ran down my spine. I got up immediately and went to wake up my parents, deciding it was better to be safe than sorry. I told them what I had seen and heard, and even though my dad clearly doubted me, he went outside to check the backyard. A few minutes later, he came back saying he had checked every corner and didn't see anything. He told me that if someone had been there, he would have heard them come in through the squeaky gate, or he at least would have heard them leave. He also checked the Ring camera, which showed no one walking around the house toward the backyard. I suggested that the person could have jumped the fence into the neighbor's yard, but he quickly shut that down, saying we lived in a safe neighborhood and that I should stop watching scary movies. Unfortunately, I believed him and went back to bed. Every couple of weeks or months after that, I'd hear things again. Each time, I convinced myself it was all in my head and tried to focus on my videos or fall asleep. When winter came and everything was covered in snow, it stopped, and I eventually forgot about it. But the following year, it started again. It didn't happen often, once or twice a month at most, and always past 11 p.m. I tried not to pay attention to it, even when the noises sounded like clear footsteps or deep breathing. I watched a lot of scary movies and videos, so I kept telling myself that had to be the reason. I avoided looking at the window altogether, even though I tried to believe it was all in my head. Part of me was terrified of being proven wrong. One night, against my better judgment, I looked. Not directly at the window, that was too scary. I looked at the mirror instead. This time, I swear I saw the silhouette of a person. I ran upstairs again, and once again, after checking the entire backyard, my dad told me the same thing he had the year before. And once again, I believed him. This went on for a while. I started going to bed earlier, watching videos louder or with headphones, and completely avoiding my mirror, or worse, looking directly at my window. It always stopped when the weather got colder and started again in mid-spring. One night in early December of 2021, there was a huge windstorm. I was watching a stream with my boyfriend over Discord when I decided to grab a glass of water around 11:30 p.m. On my way, I noticed my parents sitting in the living room. It caught me off guard since they rarely stayed up that late, let alone outside their bedroom. Their faces looked tense and preoccupied. I asked if everything was okay, but they brushed it off, assuring me it was nothing. I assumed I had walked in on a conversation not meant for my ears and headed back toward my room. As I turned toward the stairs, flashes of red and blue light caught my attention through the front window. A police car was pulling into our driveway. My parents immediately stood up as if they'd been expecting it, and they rushed me to my room, telling me they'd call me if needed. I wanted answers, but I knew it wasn't time to push, so I went back to my room, curiosity eating away at me. Not even 2 minutes later, I was called back upstairs. This time, they didn't keep me in the dark. My dad explained that about 15 to 20 minutes earlier, during the windstorm, he had stepped into the backyard to make sure nothing had been blown over before going to bed. While scanning the yard, he noticed the light from my bedroom window illuminating something near it. As his eye adjusted, he realized it was a man standing motionless just outside my window, staring in. My dad yelled at him and started moving toward him, but the man immediately turned and ran. He jumped the back fence effortlessly, as if he'd done it 100 times before, and he disappeared into the neighboring yards. In that moment, everything I had feared for years stopped being a possibility and became a fact. I hadn't imagined it. Someone really had been there. Terrified, my parents called the police right away, and then went to knock on the neighbor's door to warn her. The older woman who lived there didn't open the door. Instead, she yelled at them to leave or she would call the cops herself. The police eventually arrived, but since my dad hadn't gotten a clear look at the man, there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrols in the area and recommending we install more cameras, which we did. In retrospect, my back neighbor's reaction still feels deeply suspicious to me. Why was her first response to threaten my parents when all they did was knock on her door to warn her? It raises a couple questions, such as, was she living with that man my dad saw? Or had she seen him too and genuinely thought it was him knocking? Did I know the person who stood outside my window for years, or was it just some creepy neighbor who noticed a teenage girl's room with poorly covered blinds and took advantage of it? Did he only want to watch, or was he working up to something else? Even now, those questions haunt me. Knowing that someone was really there the entire time makes every sound I brushed off, every breath I thought I imagined, and every silhouette I forced myself not to look at feel so much more terrifying. I've since switched rooms and can't look at windows facing our backyard the same way anymore. Thank God mine now faces the street. What scares me the most isn't that it happened, it's how long it went on for, without anyone knowing, and how easily it could have continued. It was a cold winter day in mid-December, and I was 15 years old. I originally lived in a suburban area of Alberta with my parents in our apartment. However, we were running low on space, and with my little sister on her way, we knew we had to move to a bigger house. It seemed lucky for us at first, because there was a house just a few blocks down that was selling for a very cheap price tag. Granted, it wasn't the best looking or in the best area, but it had room to grow in. And for the price we paid, we could renovate to our heart's content. My dad did renovate slightly with the money we had left, but mainly the basement as it was almost unusable without being fixed up. Cleaning, carpeting, new beams, fixing the bathroom, and fresh wallpaper with a cool pattern I got to choose myself. For the first couple of months, living there had been great and I was really enjoying the new house. Until the first questionable moment came along. It was my father's birthday, and to celebrate, we all had gone to a restaurant in the evening. All went well until we came home to our front door wide open. My mom was absolutely shaken, and we begged my dad to drive us away from the house while she called the police. My dad grabbed a large, heavy wrench from his toolbox in the truck and went into the house to search for the intruder. My mom and I called the cops anyway, and we sat there for 5 excruciatingly long minutes before they arrived. They searched the house and found my dad, and he came back out and told us nothing was actually stolen, and no one was in the house either. However, some of our items were moved or knocked over, specifically the books on my bookshelf. The police eventually finished their search and told us the same thing. We were still a little paranoid, but finally, we went inside our home. From that day forward, I would always hear strange noises coming from the walls, and sometimes underneath our basement. Might I add, my room was there, in the basement, but I always dismissed the sounds as the pipes. This was an older house after all. That was until one night something unexplainable happened. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was playing with my Nintendo DS under the sheets with no volume so my parents didn't know I was still awake. That's when I heard it. Clear laughter coming from the wall to the side of my bed. My heart froze in time, and my eyes probably widened to the size of plates. I didn't know what I should do. Ignore it? Call my parents? Go investigate? I decided to wait for a while to see if it happened again. But after about 30 minutes of laying still as a stone, I decided it must have just been my sleep-deprived imagination, and finally went to sleep. I woke up the next morning in my bed. As usual, nothing changed. Despite that laugh still burning in my mind, I tried to pass it off. I would still hear the same strange noises every so often for the next couple of weeks, but that felt normal for me now. This is when the next occurrence happens. By this time, my sister was already born, and since the basement was big enough, plus my mom trusted me with keeping her safe at night, she shared the room with me. Now, this doesn't mean my mom didn't use baby monitors, because she did. She kept the parent units in the living room, and the other in the kitchen. One night, my parents had gone out for a late-night dinner and left me to take care of the house until they got back. I was in the living room watching a movie when I got up to get a snack from the kitchen. That's when I noticed odd noises coming from the baby monitor. And my heart sank. I knew no one else was home, but those were footsteps, loud, heavy footsteps. Suddenly, my fear was realized when my sister started crying, and I heard a faint shh sound come out of the speaker, followed by a crash. I instantly did the first thing that came to mind, which now, thinking clearly in retrospect, could have gotten us both killed. I ran as quickly as I could up to my parents' room and grabbed my father's rifle. However, I didn't have the key to unlock the trigger lock or any of the ammunition. I figured I would pretend it was loaded and try to hide the lock with my hand. If I was attacked, I would use the buttstock to defend myself. All I thought of was getting my sister to safety. When I got to the basement door, I opened it quietly and walked down the steps, turning to face my sister's crib. No one was there, but she was still crying, as well as the baby monitor being on the ground sideways. I mustered all the courage I could and yelled, "I'm armed. Come out before I find you." Still nothing. I grabbed my sister and ran upstairs. I closed the basement door and pushed a chair under the handle to keep it locked while I called my parents. They called the police and got home as fast as they could. The police got to my house before my parents did, so they made me sit in the back of the cop car with my baby sister while one of the police officers went inside to investigate. When my parents arrived, I told them everything that happened. They were confused but very concerned. They knew I wasn't the type of kid that would lie about something like this. The police officer came out and gave us an all clear and said no one was in the house. Just as they finished talking to us and were about to leave, My dad worriedly asked them if they checked behind the bookshelf. In my room, there was a bookshelf that came embedded into the wall, so I was very confused when my dad asked to look behind it. The police officer was confused too, and asked my father to come inside with him and point out what he meant. Lo and behold, when we got downstairs, my bookshelf was pushed open slightly like a door, and the basement window that leads to the backyard was opened all the way, with my desk chair planted under it. Behind the bookshelf was a small room with some of the pipes to our house, and the pipes wrapped around some of the walls. On the ground were some food wrappers, one of our cups that had gone missing, lotion, a switchblade, along with an apple that was partially eaten but still slightly fresh. Someone had been living in our house, and we didn't even know it this whole time. The police said that most likely while they were outside talking to us, whoever was here escaped through the open window. They said to call if we ever noticed anything suspicious. However, they didn't think the person would come back now that we knew of their secret. That wasn't even the most horrifying part, however. A few days later, I pushed open the bookshelf myself and explored it top to bottom. That's when I found a tiny hole in the wall, and when I looked through, it pointed directly to my bed and dresser. Whoever was in there was watching me sleep, get dressed, play my video games, do my homework, speak on the phone, everything. They knew most of my life. I'm an adult now, and I live in my own apartment with my boyfriend. My parents still live there 5 years later. To this day, I worry for them, and hope whoever that was never returns. When shit hit the fan with my parents, I had to move out. I was down on my luck living situation-wise, and I could only crash on the couches of my friends for so long. I was looking on all the roommate and apartment apps and websites, and I found something that caught my eye on this app. A man named Luke had listed a room for rent in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house. The rent price was $1,200 a month. He'd basically be my landlord and roommate, as he would also be living in the house. He made sure to note on the ad that he'd be out of the house most of the time, and that the renter would have the place to themselves often. He did put in all capital letters a few ground rules though, including no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and no use of the basement. They seemed like pretty standard rules. I went to view the house in person and meet Luke. The second he opened the door, I got a bit of a read on him, that he was a little reclusive. His demeanor was quiet and a little awkward. He showed me the house. I could tell he was nervous because his voice would shake and he would stutter. The bedroom was a good size, and the actual floor plan of the house was good. It was an open layout, meaning the kitchen, living room, and dining room were all one big open space. For $1,000 a month in my area, it was a steal. He laid out some more ground rules in person, and he emphasized again how I can't go in the attic or the basement, as I use them for storage only. Sounded fair enough. On the spot, I told him I'm interested. We shook hands, I left, and 2 days later, I was moving in. We didn't draft any sort of lease or contract. I was just going to be paying him off the books month to month, the first day of every month. I had settled in pretty quickly. The bedroom I was renting was already furnished with a bed and basic furniture, so all I did really was hang some of my wall decor and fill the dresser and closet with clothes. The bedroom had a lock on it, thankfully, and he gave me the key to it so I could lock it when he wasn't home, which seemed like a nice gesture, at first. Luke never told me what he did for work. He just told me he usually wouldn't be home, but I quickly learned that wasn't true. Anytime I'd come home from work, his car was always in the driveway. Quickly, I started to pick up on loud sounds outside of my bedroom at night, from footsteps to doors opening and closing constantly. One night, I went out in the middle of the night just to go to the bathroom, and I noticed the basement door was opened. I walked over to the top of the stairs and looked down. There was a dim light from down there, seemingly from a far corner out of view. I heard banging sounds coming from down there. It was like 2 a.m. What could he be doing down there? Then the bangs stopped, and Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at me. It was so creepy that describing it in words doesn't do it justice. He looked visibly annoyed as he looked up at me. I apologized and said I'm just going to the bathroom. He almost angrily responded, "Shut the basement door." I listened to him, insanely weirded out. I went to the bathroom and then back to bed. I laid awake for a while after that, now with my mind racing, wondering what he's doing. About a week later, I returned home and noticed my bedroom door was unlocked. I always locked it before leaving every day. I looked around my room to see if anything was missing, and while nothing seemed to be missing, I noticed some things had been moved. For starters, my clothes in the dressers were not neatly stacked anymore. They had been looked through, I could tell. The closet door was also cracked open. It was dawning on me that he had his own key, and he likely came into my room and went through my stuff. This felt like a clear invasion of privacy and a violation of my tenant rights. I had to figure out how to confront him about it. I went to knock on his bedroom door, but he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway once again, so he had to be home. I was getting such weird vibes from all of this. I gave up and went back to my room after microwaving my dinner. While I was in my room relaxing and watching TV, I heard the door to Luke's room open. I took this opportunity to get up and confront him, so I went out to the living room and caught him in a hurry about to leave the house. I stopped him and asked if he went into my room. He looked at me with a blank expression and straight up said no. I delicately responded without being hostile, saying that the door was unlocked and some of my stuff appeared to have been gone through. He then claimed that I had the only key to my bedroom, and then he said he's in a hurry, he has to go, and he left. I was flabbergasted by all of this. I wanted to ask my parents for advice, but at that time I hated them and wanted nothing to do with them. I was already back on the apps and websites looking up other listings. I knew I didn't want to stay here. Then I realized this was the first apparent time that Luke wasn't home while I was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I had to check out the basement. I checked out the windows first to make sure his car was gone, and it was. I then went over to open the basement door. Oddly enough, I couldn't find any light switches, so I just used the flashlight on my phone to navigate around. The steps were so creaky I felt like I was in an abandoned house. I got to the bottom, and there was a tan carpet that was curling upwards at the walls as if it were poorly fitted to the floor. It was a very small basement, at least the main room. There was just this one ugly couch in the middle of the room. There was also a slightly funky smell down there, and the smell only got worse as I got closer to this door in the corner. I attempted to open the door, but unfortunately it was locked. Or maybe I should say fortunately, because I'm not sure I fully wanted to know what was in there, emitting that smell. It almost smelled like raw sewage, but worse. I did one little quick sweep around the main room of the basement though, and I found nothing, just some taped up cardboard boxes which I was not going to open. I went back upstairs and shut the door. The rest of that night, I stayed in my room. I never heard Luke come back. He must have gotten back after I had fallen asleep. I woke up. The room was still dark. My alarm was not going off. Something else had woken me up. I heard the floor next to my bed crack, and I turned and saw Luke leaning over my bed, looking at me. I screamed, and he replied to me to shush, and then asked me if I went into the basement. I screamed, "No, how did you get in here? I locked the door." He then asked me, "Are you sure?" I flipped the cards on him and yelled, "Did you come into this room when I wasn't home?" He replied no. Then he turned around and walked toward the door. I asked, "How did you get in here then?" I saw him hold up his hand in the dark. He wasn't holding anything. At the time, I didn't know what it meant. He said to me before leaving the room, "I think you should find other living arrangements." And then he closed the door. I started packing my shit right then and there. I wasn't staying another minute in that house. I knocked on his door and yelled at him to give me half of the rent money back since I'd only been there like 2 weeks. Moments later, he opened the door, and just his arm stuck out from the door, holding a small stack of $100 bills. He managed to make even handing me the money insanely creepy. I grabbed it. It was only $400. Whatever, it was close enough. I just wanted to get out of there. I was fully packed and out of there within an hour. I slept in my car that night. I ended up back in my parents' house the next day, and after explaining the ludicrous shit I just went through, something changed where they were more welcoming to have me back. I still moved out a month later, but my parents and I are fine now. If you're choosing to have a random roommate from online, just be careful and use your best judgment after meeting them. It was my junior year of college. I had moved off campus into a student apartment building. My roommate was sort of assigned to me by the school, in the sense that he was just someone else who needed someone to live with. His name was David, and he seemed like a nice guy at first. He was friendly and polite, always smiling and making small talk. But as the days went by, I started to notice strange things about him. Little quirks and odd behaviors that made me feel uneasy. It started with the way David would always linger in my room, asking pushy questions about my personal life and poking around my belongings as if he were way too comfortable doing so. At first, I brushed it off as harmless curiosity, even if I found it kinda weird. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Then there were the sounds I would hear coming from David's room late at night, talking and shuffling noises that were slightly concerning. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just David watching TV or talking on the phone, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, unable to sleep because of the strange noises coming from David's room, I decided to investigate. I crept silently down the hallway and pressed my ear against David's door, straining to hear what was going on inside. What I heard was just weird. It was the sound of David whispering to himself, his voice low and muffled. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whisper stopped, and there was nothing but silence. Then I heard, "Jeff?" David said my name. Did he somehow know I was outside his door? I quickly and quietly tiptoed away from his door and back to my room. I silently crawled back into my bed. I didn't know what to make of this. Why was David talking to himself? Was he hiding something from me? Or was he sleepwalking? But then how did he know I was outside of his room? I couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness. The next day, I kept thinking about the night before. As the days went by and the sounds from David's room persisted, my paranoia only grew worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that David was hiding something from me. David's behavior also became stranger. I started to notice little subtle changes in his behavior, like he would make strange glances at me, and his movements seemed a little furtive. One night, I woke up at some off hour in the night and heard David's whispering voice from outside in the hallway, like right outside my door. It was genuinely freaking me out, and I was wondering if he was sleepwalking. I went to the door and put my ear up against it, and like last time, the whispering stopped. And then, David once again said, "Jeff?" This time I replied and said, "Yeah, you good?" He didn't respond. I just heard his footsteps walk away to his room. The following night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door closing. I heard David's footsteps walking away in the hallway. This was getting out of hand. The next day, I decided to confront him about his potential sleepwalking. I told him I'd been hearing him walking around late at night and heard him close my door last night. I then asked him if he has ever been known to sleepwalk or have any kind of sleeping disorders. He seemed to not know how to answer at first, but then he said, yes, he does tend to sleepwalk sometimes. I wasn't buying it though, something was up. I decided to search David's room for answers. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I waited until David was out of the apartment, then I crept into his room. I knew that I might not have much time, so I searched quickly, tearing through drawers and closets in search of anything that might explain David's nightly strange behavior. And then, just as I was about to give up, I found it. A small, nondescript drawer hidden at the back of David's closet. I pulled it open, and my blood ran cold at what I found inside. It was a collection of photographs, dozens of them, mostly featuring me asleep and one other guy who looked to be our age, all mixed together. They were taken from different angles and distances, some of them so close up that I could see the pores on my skin and individual strands of hair on my head. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized what I was looking at. David had been secretly taking pictures of me while I slept without my knowledge or consent. I couldn't believe it. I had been living with some kind of sick voyeur, like he probably got off somehow to these pictures. He had been violating my privacy and invading my personal space for who knows how long. I wanted to confront David, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what he might do, afraid of what he might say, afraid of what might happen if I confronted him alone. So I took a picture of the contents of the drawer, and then took a handful of the photos as evidence to use against David. I packed my things, and the next day, I showed the photos to the department in charge of student housing accommodations, and they told me to let them take the appropriate action. I was lucky and got assigned to a different apartment with a normal person who needed a roommate. I never spoke to David again, Even now, years later, I still can't shake the memory of those chilling photographs and David's whispering and creeping around at night. I never found out who the other guy in the photos was. It was definitely his old roommate, but I was never able to find his name. But who knows? Maybe he also found out. When I was 23, I had to move out of state for work. I still work with the company, but I've been able to move back to my hometown and work at the local office here. But at the time, I needed somewhere to live that wouldn't be bank-breaking. I made a posting on basically all the websites for a roommate: Facebook, Craigslist, Twitter, and even on my neighborhood subreddit. I had a guy named Rob reach out to me on Facebook, stating he has a room available in his place. I looked at his pictures to see if he looked like a somewhat normal guy, and he did. I was open to the idea of having a male roommate, as long as they seemed normal, even though my parents were very against it. Rob and I FaceTimed, during which he gave me a virtual tour of the place. Apparently he owned the place outright. It was a modest house in the middle of town, only a 10-minute drive from where my office would be. He also seemed pretty nice. I didn't get any bad vibes at all. His price was fair, and his rules were pretty fair too. He said it was available to move in right away, which was perfect. So it was settled. A week later, I had all my things packed and drove down. I met Rob right out front of the house, where he greeted me and handed me a key. The first thing I noticed about him was he was really short. He was eye level with me. He helped me bring some of the bigger and heavier bags inside. He showed me my room, which was furnished already. He said one of his friends had been living there and recently moved out. I replaced all the pillows and bed sheets with my own, of course. The rest of that day was me settling in. Rob, I could see, was trying to get to know me and presumably make me feel at home. I didn't get any overly friendly vibes yet. The next day was Sunday. Rob offered to drive me around town to show me around. I wasn't eager to, but I said sure, just to get off on a good start with him. He drove us around town, showing me where the good shopping centers are, good restaurants, and stuff like that. But then he offered to get us lunch. I really wasn't hungry, and he was suggesting a sit-down lunch, almost like a date. I didn't want him to get any kind of wrong idea, I just needed a room. I said I'm not hungry, and then he right away suggested we go grab drinks somewhere instead. I politely shot it down too, saying I don't drink on work nights. He was being a bit pushy, saying, come on, just a couple drinks. I still maintained my politeness and said another time. He gave up, and he went really quiet all of a sudden, like he was upset. I'll admit, I was slightly uncomfortable, but nothing I couldn't handle yet. That week was my first week at work, and so my attention was focused mostly on adjusting to the work week. It wasn't until a few days into the week that I got home and did my laundry and noticed my hamper full of clothes seemed moved. Like the clothes weren't how I remembered they were left, and it wasn't until I was loading the washing machine that I noticed a pair of my underwear was missing. I checked my room top to bottom like 5 times. It was gone. I had a disturbing thought. What if Rob... No, I refused to believe that just yet, and there was no chance in hell I would confront him and ask him that. Still, I was now starting to wish there was a lock on the bedroom door. That weekend, I bought a lockable doorknob from Ace Hardware, and while Rob wasn't home, I swapped out the current doorknob with the new one. Now I could leave the place in peace. I figured I'd tell Rob the next time I saw him. He didn't come home that night, though. He must have been working. His schedule seemed pretty random. That night, I awoke to banging on my bedroom door. It was Rob. He was saying my name, and he didn't sound happy. I checked the time, and it was like 1:30 in the morning. I decided I would pretend I'm asleep. I was honestly kind of scared to open the door. I had a feeling it had to do with the doorknob, and I was right. The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of texts from Rob, saying, "We need to talk. Be home after work." I simply responded, "Is this about the doorknob?" And he responded back, "Yes." I apologized to him and said I was planning on telling him. He replied back, "It comes off today." I was getting incredibly nasty and weird vibes from his tone. My next response I thought out a little longer, and basically said how I hope he can sympathize and understand that I'm a girl and I just feel safer being able to have privacy in my room. He responded a little nicer this time, but he still basically said no to my request and that the old doorknob needs to go back on. I was confused, I was upset, but I had to respect his rules. I did also install it without telling him, so I felt like he had a right to be kind of mad. But how did he know I changed it? It's not like I had the old doorknob sitting out in the open. The idea that he tried coming into my room that night kind of scared me. I changed the doorknob back the next day and returned to Ace. This is where things went really downhill though. There was a knock at the door one day when Rob wasn't home. It was a girl around my age. She asked me if I was living here with Rob, and I said yes. She warned me to get out of there immediately, that Rob has multiple restraining orders against him from different girls, and he's known to be a very dangerous, creepy stalker. I was at a loss for words. I asked her how she knew I was here. She said she knew that he was trying to rent his room, and that it's not surprising he opted to have a girl move in. She said she saw me moving in and wanted to wait till he wasn't home to come warn me. I thanked her so much. I truly was terrified now. I had already paid Rob for the entire month. I didn't know what to do. She said she would help me in any way she could. I took her number and she left. I started packing my things and looking for other places I could move to. I found something across town, a studio apartment sublet for a little more money. I contacted the poster of the ad, and she told me I could move in as soon as possible. Perfect. Now I just needed to tell Rob and get my money back. I started packing some of my stuff into my car, and I texted him that I'd have to be moving out tomorrow, as something with my family came up and I needed to go home. He didn't answer. He got back to the house about an hour later and asked me about my text. I came up with my best fake story possible, and he said yeah, he'll give me the money back tomorrow after he goes to the bank. I was super relieved. About an hour later, he knocked on my door and then said, "Did by some chance some girl say something to you?" I simply said, "No, what do you mean?" And he said, "Never mind. It just seems like you're running away out of here for another reason." I insisted that it was purely because of the family reasons. He said okay and left. Sadly, the story didn't end there. I woke up that night and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw a black figure sitting on the end of the bed. It was Rob. He turned and put his hand on my mouth and went, "Shh." I said, "Please don't hurt me." And he responded, "Why would I hurt you? I knew someone said something to you. Don't believe what these girls say." I said, "You're scaring me," and this part is still just as insane to me as it was in that moment. He started to caress my leg, and he said, "I don't mean to scare you," right after I said he's scaring me. I got out of the bed and ran for the door, and he screamed at me to stop. I ran outside with my phone in hand and called the police. I hid in the bush until they showed up, and I explained the entire situation to them. They made Rob come outside and give his side of the story. Basically, I told them I just want to get all my stuff out of the room and I'm leaving. So the cops stayed there as I collected the remainder of my stuff and brought it all to my car. I also insisted on Rob Venmoing me the money back while the police were there, and he did so actually. The whole time the police were there, he tried his best to act like some normal dude, I could tell. One of the officers then pulled me to the side to tell me that this guy had been arrested before for other incidents with women, but Rob denied ever coming in my room or touching me or anything, so it was all he said, she said. I left the house and went straight to a hotel for the night. The next day, I moved into the studio apartment. Luckily, the girl who posted it was able to facilitate my quick move-in. I have never and will never live with another man who's not my boyfriend or husband ever again, or just anyone I don't know for that matter.